When a single father's carefully rebuilt life collides with a forbidden pregnancy, he discovers that some secrets destroy careers and others destroy everything. Daniel Reed thought he'd mastered survival after losing his wife, raise his son, keep his head down, never get too close. Then Lena Whitmore, the untouchable executive at the top of his firm, showed him a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. In that moment, standing in her kitchen while his own son slept miles away, Daniel realized that the quiet life he'd fought so hard to build was about to shatter. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this journey travels. The kitchen was too quiet. Daniel Reed had learned to read silence the way other men read contracts, carefully, looking for the clauses that would cost him everything. And this silence, thick and suffocating in Lena Whitmore's pristine downtown loft, was the kind that preceded catastrophe. She stood by the marble counter, backlit by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city's glittering skyline. In her hand, a small white stick. 2 pink lines. Daniel's throat constricted as he stared at those lines, his mind already calculating trajectories, consequences, the careful architecture of his life beginning to crack. "You're sure?" His voice came out steadier than he felt, a skill honed through 3 years of single fatherhood, of holding himself together when everything inside wanted to collapse. Lena's fingers tightened around the test. She was still wearing her work clothes, tailored black pants, silk blouse, the armor of a woman who commanded boardrooms. But her eyes, those sharp green eyes that could dissect a contract at 50 paces, looked lost. "I took 3, she said. "All positive." Daniel's hands found his pockets, a defensive gesture he'd developed to keep from reaching for things he couldn't have. Lena Whitmore was one of those things. Executive Vice President of Strategic Development at Morrison & Hayes, the firm where Daniel worked as a senior legal analyst. She was untouchable. He was replaceable. The math was simple and brutal. They'd been careful, discreet. What started 6 months ago as a late-night review of merger documents had evolved into something Daniel couldn't quite name, too intense to be casual, too complicated to be anything else. He told himself it was temporary, that he was just a distraction for a woman whose entire existence was high-stakes negotiations and power plays. He told himself a lot of things. None of them included this. "It's mine?" The question came out before he could stop it, and he hated himself for asking, hated the doubt that crept into his voice. Lena's expression hardened, that boardroom mask sliding into place. "Close the door, Daniel." He turned and pushed the door shut, the soft click echoing in the vast space. When he faced her again, she'd set the test down on the counter, her hands pressed flat against the marble as if bracing for impact. "There hasn't been anyone else," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Not in over a year. Not since—" She stopped, shook her head. "Yes, it's yours." Confirmation should have felt like something. Relief, maybe, or terror. Instead, Daniel felt only the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders, the same weight he'd carried since the day his wife Emma died, and left him alone with a 2-year-old son who didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. "Okay." He moved closer, his lawyer's brain already sorting through options, contingencies. "Okay, we need to... What do you want to do?" Lena looked at him then, really looked at him, and Daniel saw something flicker across her face that he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Lena Whitmore, who negotiated 9-figure deals without blinking, who'd made grown men cry in contract disputes, looked uncertain. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent the last 2 hours trying to think through every scenario, every possibility, and I don't know." Daniel understood that feeling intimately. After Emma died, he'd spent months in that same fog, unable to see a path forward, paralyzed by the weight of choices that would determine not just his future, but his son's. He'd learned to move through uncertainty by focusing on the next right step, then the next, building a life one careful decision at a time. "How far along?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 6 weeks? 7? She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture so unlike her usual composed confidence that it made Daniel's chest ache. "I've been so busy with the Hartman acquisition that I didn't even notice until—" "Have you seen a doctor?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." The admission surprised him. In the 6 months of whatever this was between them, they'd maintained careful boundaries. No promises, no expectations, no disruption to the carefully compartmentalized lives they'd both constructed. Lena never asked about his son, and he never asked about the parts of her life that existed outside the walls of Morrison and Hayes. But this demolished every boundary they'd built. "We should make an appointment," Daniel said, falling into the practical problem-solving mode that had kept him functional through grief. "Get confirmation. Figure out how far along you actually are. Then we can—" "What?" Lena's voice sharpened. "Make a plan? Run a cost-benefit analysis? This isn't a merger, Daniel." "I know that." He kept his tone even, refusing to rise to her defensiveness. "But we still need information before we can make any decisions." "We?" She laughed, a harsh sound. "You're going to want to be part of this decision?" The question hit harder than she probably intended. Daniel thought of his son, Jake, 5 years old now, with Emma's dark curls and her infectious laugh. Thought of all the decisions he'd made alone since she died. Which preschool, which pediatrician, how to explain death to a toddler who kept asking when mommy was coming back from heaven. "Yes," he said simply. "Whatever you decide, I'm part of this." Lena studied him for a long moment, and Daniel held her gaze, letting her see the truth of it. He might not have planned this, might not have any idea how to navigate the impossible complexity of having a child with a woman who was essentially his boss, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He didn't abandon the people who needed him. "I have a son," he said quietly. "Jake, he's 5. Lena blinked, clearly surprised. "You've never mentioned, you never asked." There was no accusation in his voice, just fact. They'd both been careful not to let their personal lives bleed into whatever this was. His mother died when he was 2, cancer. I've been raising him alone since then. He watched the information settle over her, saw her reassessing him the way she would a contract, looking for the hidden clauses. In the office, he was Daniel Reed, competent but unremarkable. The kind of lawyer who did good work but never quite broke through to the upper echelons where people like Lena operated. She never had reason to know about the parts of his life that existed outside conference rooms and late-night document reviews. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "That must have been— it was hell." Daniel cut her off, not unkindly. "But Jake and I, we figured it out. Built a life that works. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And it's good." He paused. "I'm telling you this so you know, I understand what it means to be responsible for another life. And I understand how terrifying it is when you can't see the path forward." Lena's shoulders dropped slightly, some of the defensive tension leaving her body. "I never wanted children," she said. "I've spent 15 years building my career, making myself indispensable. A pregnancy now. At this stage—" She shook her head. "Victor Lang is circling for my position. The Hartman deal is at a critical phase. If the board thinks I'm compromised, if they see any weakness, then we're careful," Daniel said. "We don't tell anyone until you're ready." "And what about us?" The question hung in the air between them. "What are we, Daniel? Because I need to know what I'm dealing with here." He'd been dreading this question for months, the inevitable moment when whatever they were doing would have to be named, defined, made real. They'd existed in a comfortable ambiguity, meeting in neutral spaces, keeping their connection separate from the rest of their lives. But pregnancy had a way of forcing clarity. "I don't know what we are," he admitted, "but I know what I'm not. I'm not someone who walks away." Lena looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. She nodded slowly, then glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. They both had to be at the office in 7 hours. "I should go," Daniel said, though he didn't move toward the door. "Jake's with my sister tonight, but I need to pick him up early tomorrow." "Daniel," Lena's voice stopped him. Don't tell anyone. Not yet. I need time to think about what this means, how to handle it." "I won't say anything," he promised. "But Lena, we can't wait too long. You'll need prenatal care, and there are decisions that are time-sensitive." "I know." She rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I'll make an appointment this week. I'll text you the details." He wanted to stay, wanted to pull her into his arms and promise that everything would be okay, even though he had no idea if that was true. But the rules of whatever they were didn't include comfort, didn't include the kind of intimacy that went beyond physical attraction and intellectual connection. So he just nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind him with that same soft click. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. Daniel stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors, seeing a man he barely recognized. At 34, he was supposed to have his life figured out. Instead, he was looking at a future that made no sense. A second child with a woman who was essentially a stranger outside of conference rooms and midnight encounters, in a situation that could destroy both their careers. His phone buzzed as he stepped out into the cool night air. A text from his sister, Sarah. "Jake wants to show you something he built tomorrow. He's very proud. Also, he ate 3 bowls of mac and cheese for dinner, so good luck with bedtime." Daniel smiled despite everything, the thought of his son's enthusiasm cutting through the anxiety. Jake was the one thing in his life that made complete sense, the one relationship that was simple and pure and unconditional. Whatever happened with Lena, whatever complicated mess they were about to navigate, Jake would always be his priority. He texted back, "Tell him I can't wait to see it. Thanks for watching him, Sarah." Her response came immediately. "Anytime, you okay? You seemed stressed when you dropped him off." Daniel stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Sarah was the only person who knew about Lena, though she only knew the barest details. That there was someone, that it was complicated, that Daniel was being careful. She'd worried about him after Emma died, watched him retreat into himself, focus everything on Jake, and work until there was nothing left over for anything else. When he'd finally mentioned Lena 6 months ago, Sarah had been cautiously optimistic. "It's okay to let someone in," she'd said. "Emma would want you to be happy." But happiness had never been part of the equation with Lena. It was attraction, yes, intellectual compatibility, the rush of doing something that felt vaguely forbidden. But happiness required vulnerability, required letting someone see all the broken parts, and neither of them had been willing to go there. Until now. Until biology had made that decision for them. "I'm fine," he typed. "Just a long day. See you tomorrow." He shoved the phone in his pocket and started walking. His apartment was only a few blocks away, and the cold air helped clear his head. The city at night was a different beast than during the day, quieter, more honest somehow. The people you passed on the street at midnight were either heading home from somewhere or heading somewhere they probably shouldn't be. Daniel wasn't sure which category he fell into anymore. His apartment building was modest compared to Lena's downtown loft, an older brick structure in a neighborhood that was trying hard to gentrify but hadn't quite gotten there yet. Daniel had moved here after Emma died, needing something different from the house they'd shared, the rooms that still smelled like her perfume. The apartment was small but functional. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances that mostly worked. Jake's room was an explosion of primary colors and stuffed animals, a stark contrast to Daniel's own sparse bedroom with its gray walls and minimal furniture. He dropped his keys on the counter and opened the refrigerator, staring at its contents without really seeing them. Half a carton of milk. Some questionable leftover pasta. A 6-pack of beer he'd bought 3 weeks ago and hadn't touched. He grabbed a beer, then put it back. Drinking alone at 1 in the morning wasn't going to solve anything. Instead, he walked to Jake's room and stood in the doorway, looking at the carefully made bed, his sister's work, not Jake's. The pile of books on the nightstand, the drawing on the wall that Jake had insisted on hanging himself. A crayon rendering of the two of them, stick figures holding hands, both wearing enormous smiles. "Daddy and me at the park," Jake had explained when he'd drawn it. "We're happy." Daniel's throat tightened. They were happy. Despite everything, despite the loss and the struggle and the constant fear that he was messing everything up, they had built something good. Jake was thriving. He was bright and curious and kind. The kind of kid who noticed when other kids were sad and tried to make them feel better. And now Daniel was going to bring another child into the world. Except this time there would be no marriage, no partnership, no clear path forward. Just 2 people who'd made a mistake and now had to figure out how to be responsible for the consequences. Except it wasn't a mistake, was it? Not really. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Some part of Daniel, the part he didn't like to examine too closely, had maybe wanted this to happen, wanted a reason to make whatever he and Lena had into something real, something that existed in daylight instead of just late nights and stolen moments. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back through his messages with Lena. There weren't many. They usually communicated in person, in the margins of meetings, in the quiet moments between work and whatever came after. The texts that did exist were brief, practical. Can you review the Anderson contract? Or meeting moved to 3 p.m. Nothing personal. Nothing that would indicate they were anything other than colleagues. Daniel's thumb hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to text her, to check if she was okay, to say something that might make this all feel less overwhelming. But what could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? That it would be okay? He didn't know if that was true. That he'd be there? He'd already said that. So he put the phone away and went to bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come easy, knowing that tomorrow he'd have to wake up and be Jake's father, be the competent lawyer everyone at Morrison and Hayes expected him to be, all while carrying the secret that could unravel everything. What? Morning came too early and too bright. Daniel woke to his alarm with the disorienting sensation of having barely slept. His dreams a confused tangle of Emma's face and Lena's voice, and Jake asking questions he couldn't answer. He went through his morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, the simple breakfast he always made for himself because cooking for one never felt worth the effort. By 7:30 he was in his car, heading to Sarah's house on the other side of town. Sarah lived in the kind of neighborhood Daniel had always imagined he'd end up in. Tree-lined streets, houses with actual yards, neighbors who knew each other's names. She and her husband Tom had 2 kids of their own, and Jake fit seamlessly into their chaos whenever Daniel needed help. Sarah met him at the door, still in her robe, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked tired. Tom had been traveling for work again, leaving her to manage both kids alone. But she smiled when she saw him. "He's in the living room," she said. "Fair warning, he's built something with every single Lego we own, and he will be devastated if you don't spend at least 20 minutes admiring it." Daniel felt some of the tension from last night ease. This was familiar territory. "I would never dream of giving it less than 30. Sarah studied his face with the particular intensity of someone who'd known him his entire life. They'd grown up together, survived their parents' messy divorce together, been each other's constants through every major life event. She could read him better than anyone, which made it nearly impossible to hide anything from her. "You look like hell," she said bluntly. "Thanks." "I'm serious, Daniel. What's going on?" Before he could answer, Jake came barreling around the corner, his dark curls bouncing, his face split in an enormous grin. "Daddy, look what I made!" Daniel scooped him up, pressing a kiss to the top of his head, breathing in the sweet smell of the strawberry shampoo Sarah used on all the kids. "Good morning, buddy. I hear you've been working on something amazing." "It's a spaceship," Jake announced with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old, "with rockets and everything. Come see." He wriggled out of Daniel's arms and grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the living room. Sarah gave Daniel a look that said this conversation isn't over, but she let Jake lead him away. The spaceship was indeed impressive, a towering structure of multicolored Legos that looked vaguely spacecraftish if you squinted and used your imagination. Jake walked him through every detail, explaining the function of each section with an earnestness that made Daniel's chest ache. "And this part," Jake said, pointing to a particularly precarious-looking section, "is where the astronauts sleep, because they get tired when they're in space." "That makes sense," Daniel agreed seriously. "Everyone needs rest, even astronauts." "Even you, Daddy?" "Even me." Jake looked up at him with Emma's eyes. That same deep brown, that same way of looking at you like they could see straight through to your soul. "You look tired. Were you working late again?" Daniel pulled him close, marveling at how perceptive his son was, how he'd learned to read the adults around him with the kind of accuracy that came from having his world turned upside down at age 2. "A little bit, but I'm okay, buddy, I promise." "Can we go to the park today? Aunt Sarah said maybe we could go to the big park with the cool slide." "Absolutely. After breakfast, we'll head over there." They spent another 15 minutes discussing the spaceship's finer points before Sarah called them for breakfast. Jake ran ahead, and Sarah caught Daniel's arm, holding him back. "Okay, spill," she said quietly. "What happened last night?" Daniel glanced toward the kitchen where he could hear Jake chattering to Sarah's kids about his spaceship. Not here, not now. Daniel, please, Sarah, I need to focus on Jake today. Can we talk about it later? She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she nodded reluctantly. Tonight, after Jake's in bed, you're not shutting me out of this. I won't. Breakfast was the usual controlled chaos of 3 kids under 10 trying to eat pancakes without getting syrup everywhere. Daniel sat at the table, half listening to Jake's excited chatter about the park, half lost in the surreal reality of his situation. In just a few months, there could be another child, another life that depended on him, except this time, the mother wouldn't be gone. She'd be there, in his life, in his son's life, a constant reminder of the complicated mess they'd created. How was he supposed to explain that to Jake? Hey, buddy, you know how mommy died and it's been just you and me? Well, I'm about to have a baby with someone else. Someone you've never met. Someone who isn't your mom and never will be. His stomach twisted at the thought. Daniel? Sarah's voice cut through his spiral. You okay? He realized he'd been staring at his plate, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Jake was looking at him with concern, and Daniel forced a smile. Just thinking about work, he lied. Sorry, what were you saying, Jake? Jake launched back into his explanation of which playground equipment they should try first, and Daniel made himself focus, made himself be present. Whatever was happening with Lena, whatever impossible situation they were navigating, Jake deserved his full attention. After breakfast, they said goodbye to Sarah with promises to talk later, and Daniel loaded Jake into his car seat, listening to him chatter about the park, about the spaceship, about a million small things that filled up a 5-year-old's world. The park was busy for a Saturday morning, filled with other parents and their kids, all of them navigating the same basic challenges of childhood. How high to let them climb, whether to intervene when they argued over the swings, how to keep them from getting hurt while still letting them take the risks they needed to grow. Daniel had learned to find peace in these moments, in the simple routine of pushing Jake on the swings, catching him at the bottom of the slide, wiping dirt off scraped knees. It was uncomplicated in a way the rest of his life wasn't. Just a father and his son, building memories one playground visit at a time. Higher, Daddy! Jake shrieked from the swing, his legs pumping enthusiastically. You're already pretty high, buddy, but I want to touch the sky. Daniel smiled despite everything and gave the swing a stronger push, watching Jake soar higher, his laughter ringing out across the playground. This was what mattered. This was what he was fighting for, the life he'd built for them both. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, focused on Jake. It buzzed again and again. Just a second, buddy, he said, slowing the swing. Jake protested, but Daniel was already pulling out his phone, some instinct telling him this wasn't something he could ignore. 3 texts from Lena. I made an appointment, Monday at 2 p.m. Dr. Catherine Walsh. She's discreet. Can you come? Daniel stared at the messages, Monday's reality crashing into Saturday's temporary peace. He thought about his calendar, about the meeting he had scheduled at 2, about how he'd have to move things around, make excuses, be careful not to draw attention. He typed back, I'll be there. Send me the address. Her response was immediate. Thank you. Daniel pocketed his phone and returned to pushing Jake on the swing, but the weight had settled back onto his shoulders, heavier than before. In 48 hours, this would all become more real. They'd see a heartbeat, hear confirmation, start making decisions that couldn't be unmade. Daddy, you're not pushing right, Jake complained. Sorry, buddy. Let's try the slide instead. They moved through the playground, and Daniel did his best to be present, to laugh at Jake's jokes, to race him to the monkey bars. But part of him was already Monday afternoon, sitting in a doctor's office with Lena, staring at an ultrasound screen and trying to figure out how any of this was going to work. By the time they left the park, Jake was tired and happy, his cheeks flushed from running around in the cold air. Daniel buckled him into his car seat and started the drive home, listening to Jake's running commentary about everything they'd done, committing it to memory because these were the moments that mattered, the ones he'd need to remember when everything else got complicated. Back at the apartment, Jake crashed on the couch with his favorite stuffed dinosaur. and Daniel pulled out his laptop, ostensibly to catch up on work, but really just staring at the screen while his mind churned through scenarios. If Lena decided to continue the pregnancy, and that was still an if, he reminded himself, her choice to make, they'd need to figure out custody arrangements, co-parenting schedules, how to explain to Jake that he was going to have a sibling. They'd need to navigate the firm, the whispers, the inevitable questions about why Lena Whitmore was having a baby with a mid-level associate. And if she decided not to continue it, Daniel's chest tightened at the thought, and he realized with startling clarity that he wanted this. Wanted another child, wanted the chance to be a father again, wanted to build something with Lena, even if he had no idea what that something would look like. But it wasn't his choice. It was hers. All he could do was show up and support whatever she decided. His phone rang, Sarah's name flashing on the screen. "Hey," he answered, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Jake. "Okay, he can't hear us now, so you're going to tell me what's actually going on." Daniel moved to the kitchen, putting more distance between himself and his sleeping son. "It's Lena," he said quietly. "She's pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, "Oh my God, Daniel!" "Yeah. Are you? It's mine. And I don't know what we're doing yet. She's processing. We have a doctor's appointment Monday." Holy shit. Sarah's voice was a mix of shock and concern. "How are you feeling about this?" Daniel leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. "I have no idea. Terrified? Relieved? It's like, with Emma, we planned Jake. We were ready, or as ready as anyone can be, but this..." He ran a hand through his hair. "Lena and I barely know each other outside of work. We've been careful not to let it be more than what? I don't know. Convenient? Safe? We both had our walls up, and now we're going to have a child together, and I have no idea how to navigate that." "Do you want to be with her?" Sarah asked gently. "Like, actually be with her?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't think that's an option. We're too different. Our lives are too complicated." "That's not what I asked." Daniel closed his eyes, thinking about Lena, the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the conversations they'd had about everything except what they actually meant to each other, the careful distance they'd maintained because getting closer felt too dangerous. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe, if circumstances were different, but they're not." "They're about to get a lot more complicated," Sarah said. "You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know." They talked for a few more minutes, Sarah offering practical advice about next steps, about how to talk to Jake when the time came, about how to protect himself at work. When they finally hung up, Daniel felt marginally better, though the weight of Monday's appointment still pressed on him. The weekend passed in a blur of normal activities: grocery shopping, laundry, building Lego spaceships, reading bedtime stories. Daniel tried to be present for all of it, tried to soak up these last moments before everything changed. Because even though nothing was decided, even though Lena could still choose to end the pregnancy, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that his life was never going to be the same. Monday morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Daniel dropped Jake at preschool, watching him run toward his classroom with his backpack bouncing, already calling out to his friends. The teacher gave Daniel a wave, and he waved back, then sat in his car for a long moment, gathering himself for the day ahead. The office felt different somehow, though nothing had actually changed. Daniel went through his normal routines, checking emails, reviewing contracts, attending a morning meeting about the Hartman acquisition where Lena presented the latest updates with her usual cool competence. She didn't look at him differently, didn't acknowledge him beyond the professional courtesy she'd always shown. But Daniel noticed the slight shadows under her eyes, the way her hand trembled just slightly when she reached for her water glass. At 1:30, Daniel made an excuse about a dentist appointment and left the office. Lena had left 10 minutes earlier, and they'd agreed to meet at the clinic separately, maintaining the careful distance they'd always kept. Dr. Walsh's office was in a medical building downtown, discreet and professional. Daniel found Lena in the waiting room, sitting with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a sweater, the first time he'd seen her in anything casual. "Hey," he said quietly, taking the seat next to her. "Hi," Her voice was tight with tension. They sat in silence, surrounded by other expectant mothers in various stages of pregnancy, their partners beside them looking nervous or excited, or both. Daniel felt acutely aware that he and Lena didn't look like the other couples, didn't have that same ease of intimacy. Lena Whitmore? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. They stood together, and Lena's hand briefly found his, squeezing once before letting go. Daniel followed her into the exam room, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the weight of what they were about to see. Dr. Walsh was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a manner that immediately put them at ease. She walked them through the basics, asked questions about Lena's medical history, about when her last period was, about symptoms. "Based on what you're telling me, I'd estimate you're about 7 weeks along," Dr. Walsh said. "We'll do an ultrasound to confirm." Lena changed into a gown, and Daniel stood by the wall, trying not to think about how surreal this all was. When she was ready, Dr. Walsh dimmed the lights and started the ultrasound. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images that meant nothing to Daniel. Then Dr. Walsh adjusted something, and suddenly there it was. A small shape, barely distinguishable, but unmistakably there. "And there's the heartbeat," Dr. Walsh said, turning up the volume. The sound filled the room, fast and strong, a rhythm that bypassed Daniel's brain and went straight to his chest. He'd heard this sound before with Emma when they'd gone to their first appointment with Jake, but somehow this felt different, more urgent, more impossible. Lena's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. Daniel looked at her face and saw tears streaming down her cheeks, her expression caught between wonder and terror. "You're measuring right at 7 weeks," Dr. Walsh continued, oblivious to or politely ignoring their emotional turmoil. "Everything looks good so far. Heart rate is strong. Due date would be approximately September 15th. September. Daniel's mind raced ahead. Jake would be starting kindergarten that month. He'd need to figure out parental leave, childcare, how to balance a newborn with a 5-year-old who was used to having all of Daniel's attention. The ultrasound continued, Dr. Walsh pointing out different parts, explaining what they were seeing. Daniel barely heard her. All he could focus on was that heartbeat, steady and insistent, and Lena's hand still wrapped around his wrist like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. When it was over and the lights came back up, Dr. Walsh handed Lena tissues and gave them both a gentle smile. "I'll give you two a few minutes," she said, stepping out of the room. Lena wiped her face, her hands shaking. "I didn't expect—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "The heartbeat. I thought it would be more abstract, you know? Just cells dividing, but that—" "I know," Daniel said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Daniel saw the same war he was fighting reflected in her eyes. The terror of what this meant versus the undeniable reality of what they'd just witnessed. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. "You won't have to." "But how?" Her voice cracked. "How are we supposed to make this work? We barely know each other, Daniel. We have no idea how to be whatever we need to be for this child." "We'll figure it out." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "The same way I figured it out with Jake after Emma died. One day at a time. One decision at a time. What if I'm terrible at it?" The vulnerability in her voice was startling. "I've never wanted kids because I was afraid I'd be like my mother, distant, critical, more invested in her career than in her children." Daniel thought about his own fears, about all the ways he worried he was failing Jake, about the constant second-guessing that came with single parenthood. "No one knows what they're doing," he said. "We just do our best and hope it's enough." Lena studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. A softening, maybe. An acknowledgement that they were in this together, whether they'd planned it or not. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." Dr. Walsh came back in, gave them information about prenatal vitamins and follow-up appointments, and by the time they left the office, it was nearly 4. They stood outside the building, both of them caught in that strange liminal space between their professional lives and this new reality. "We need to talk about work," Lena said, her executive persona sliding back into place. about when to tell people, how to manage the optics. Not yet, Daniel said. You're barely 7 weeks. Let's get through the first trimester. Make sure everything stays stable. Then we'll figure out the rest. She nodded, relief evident in her face. Thank you for coming today. She gestured vaguely, for not running away. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel said, and meant it. They parted ways in the parking garage, Lena heading back to the office, Daniel going to pick up Jake from preschool. As he drove, Daniel found himself thinking about that heartbeat, about the impossible mathematics of 2 lives colliding to create a third, about all the ways this could go wrong, and the small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to make it work. Jake was waiting for him at preschool, covered in paint and beaming with pride over the picture he'd made. Daniel listened to his excited chatter about his day, about the friend who'd shared cookies with him at snack time, about the story his teacher had read about a bear who went on an adventure. Normal, simple. The life Daniel had fought so hard to build, and now he was about to add another layer of complexity, another person to protect and provide for, another relationship to navigate. But as he looked at Jake's happy face in the rearview mirror, Daniel thought maybe, just maybe, he could do this. He'd survived losing Emma. He'd learned to be both mother and father to Jake. He'd rebuilt his life from grief into something good and whole. He could figure out how to be a father to 2 children, how to co-parent with someone who wasn't his partner, how to navigate the impossible situation they'd created. One day at a time, one decision at a time, starting now. The weeks that followed the ultrasound appointment moved with a strange duality, simultaneously crawling and racing forward. Daniel found himself caught between 2 worlds that had no business intersecting, the careful routine he'd built with Jake and the increasingly complicated reality of Lena's pregnancy. At the office, nothing changed on the surface. Lena remained the untouchable executive, commanding rooms with the same cool authority she'd always possessed. Daniel continued his work as a senior legal analyst, competent and unremarkable, the kind of employee who did good work but rarely drew attention. They passed each other in hallways with professional nods, sat in the same meetings without acknowledging anything beyond the business at hand. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, everything was shifting. Lena texted him updates, brief clinical messages about doctor's appointments and prenatal vitamins and the exhaustion that hit her in waves during afternoon meetings. Daniel responded with the same practical tone, offering information he'd learned with Jake, suggesting remedies for morning sickness, checking in without being intrusive. They met twice more outside of work, neutral territory coffee shops where they could talk without risking being seen together. The conversations were stilted at first, both of them navigating the uncomfortable territory of forced intimacy with someone who was essentially a stranger in all the ways that mattered. I need to know about your family, Lena said during their second meeting, her hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea that she hoped would settle her stomach. If we're going to do this, I need to understand what I'm getting into. Daniel had prepared for this question, knew it was inevitable. My parents divorced when I was 12. Dad remarried, moved to Arizona, sends a card at Christmas. Mom died 6 years ago, heart attack. I have one sister, Sarah. She's the one who helps with Jake when I need it. And Emma's family? The question stung more than it should have. They didn't take it well when she died, blamed me for not catching the cancer sooner, for not getting her better treatment, for... He stopped, shook his head. We don't talk anymore. They've only seen Jake twice since the funeral. Lena's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. It's fine. Jake doesn't need grandparents who look at him and only see what they lost. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, grateful for something to do with his hands. What about your family? Mother's a federal judge. Father's a corporate attorney. They've been married 42 years and barely speak to each other outside of public appearances. Her voice was flat, reciting facts rather than sharing feelings. I have a brother, Marcus. He's a surgeon in Boston. We email occasionally. Will you tell them about the baby? Lena's laugh was harsh. Eventually, when I can't hide it anymore. My mother will have opinions about how this reflects on my career. My father will want to know if you've signed any legal agreements. Marcus won't care one way or another. Daniel heard the hurt beneath her words. The years of learned distance from people who should have been close. It explained a lot about why she'd built such high walls, why intimacy felt dangerous to her. You don't have to do this like them, he said quietly. Your parents, I mean. You get to choose what kind of mother you want to be. She looked at him with something like hope flickering in her eyes, then the mask slid back into place. We should talk about logistics. When we're going to tell people at work how we're going to handle the questions. They spent the next hour mapping out scenarios, contingency plans, all the careful choreography required to navigate a situation that could destroy both their careers if handled poorly. By the time they parted ways, Daniel's head was spinning with details, and his chest ached with the realization of just how complicated this was going to be. That night, after putting Jake to bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to sketch out what the next 9 months would look like. Doctor's appointments. Telling Jake, telling the firm, figuring out custody arrangements, finding a new apartment big enough for 2 kids. The list grew longer the more he thought about it, each item spawning 3 more complications. His phone rang, Sarah's name appearing on the screen. How's it going? She asked without preamble. It's going, Daniel said, rubbing his eyes. We're figuring it out, slowly. Have you told Jake yet? No, Lena wants to wait until the 2nd trimester, make sure everything's stable first. That's probably smart. Sarah paused. How are you doing with all this, really? Daniel stared at his list, at all the impossible logistics he was trying to solve. I keep thinking about Emma, he admitted. About how excited we were when we found out about Jake, how we'd spend hours talking about names and nursery colors and what kind of parents we wanted to be. And now I'm having another child with someone who barely tolerates me outside of bed. That's not fair to either of you, Sarah said gently. You're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. Am I? Because it feels like I'm just lurching from one crisis to the next, trying to hold everything together with duct tape and hope. Welcome to parenthood. That's basically the job description. Daniel laughed despite himself. How do you make it look so easy? I don't. You just only see the edited version. You don't see the meltdowns in the grocery store or the fights with Tom about whose turn it is to deal with bedtime or the 1,000 small failures that pile up every day. She softened her voice. You're a good father, Daniel. You'll figure this out too. After they hung up, Daniel went to check on Jake one more time. His son was sprawled across the bed, one arm thrown over his stuffed dinosaur, his face peaceful in sleep. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness. Whatever happened with Lena, whatever complications lay ahead, this was still his primary job, keeping Jake safe and loved and happy. Everything else was secondary. The following Monday, Daniel arrived at work to find the office buzzing with energy. The Hartman acquisition was entering its final phase, and Lena was orchestrating the details with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Daniel had a minor role in the deal, reviewing subsidiary contracts, flagging potential issues. But he could see the bigger picture, could appreciate the complexity of what Lena was managing. He was in his office reviewing a contract when his desk phone rang. Daniel Reed, he answered absently, still focused on the document in front of him. Could you come to my office, please? Lena's voice was professional, crisp. I need you to review something. Of course, I'll be right there. Daniel gathered his notes and headed to the executive floor, nodding at the assistant who waved him through to Lena's corner office. The space was all glass and steel, with a view of the city that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. Lena sat behind her desk, looking every inch the powerful executive in her charcoal suit and pearl earrings. Close the door, she said without looking up from her computer. Daniel complied, then took the seat across from her desk, waiting. After a moment, Lena looked up, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the strain around her mouth. I'm bleeding, she said quietly. Daniel's stomach dropped. What? When? Did you call the doctor? This morning, light spotting. Dr. Walsh said it could be normal, but her voice cracked slightly. She wants to see me this afternoon. Can you? I'll be there. Daniel was already pulling out his phone, checking his calendar. What time? 3:30. I'll make it work. Lena nodded, then seemed to gather herself, pulling the professional mask back into place. Thank you. I have the revised Hartman contracts for you to review. They're in the shared folder. It was a dismissal, a return to the safety of work, and Daniel understood. He stood, then hesitated at the door. Lena, it's going to be okay. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But worrying yourself sick won't help either. He left before she could respond, his mind already racing ahead to the afternoon, to what the bleeding might mean, to all the ways this precarious situation could collapse. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Daniel tried to focus on work but kept checking his phone, half expecting Lena to text that things had gotten worse. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, he'd accomplished almost nothing, his mind too scattered to concentrate. He made excuses to his supervisor about a family emergency and left the office, driving too fast to Dr. Walsh's clinic. Lena was already in the waiting room when he arrived, sitting with that same perfect posture, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Any more bleeding? Daniel asked, taking the seat next to her. No, just the spotting this morning. She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on some point across the room. I read online that it could be normal, that lots of women spot in the first trimester, but the internet is a terrible place to look for medical information. I know, but I couldn't just sit there not knowing. They were called back within minutes, and Daniel recognized the fear in how quickly Lena moved, how desperate she was for answers. Dr. Walsh met them with the same kind demeanor as before, asking questions, taking notes, her face giving nothing away. Let's take a look, she said, setting up the ultrasound machine. The exam room fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of the equipment. Daniel found himself holding his breath as Dr. Walsh moved the wand across Lena's abdomen, the screen showing those same grainy black and white images. Then the heartbeat filled the room, steady, strong, unchanged from their last visit. There we are, Dr. Walsh said with a smile. Heart rate is right where we want it. Baby's measuring on track. The spotting you experienced is likely just implantation bleeding, which is very common and nothing to worry about. Daniel felt Lena's entire body sag with relief. He reached for her hand without thinking, and she grabbed onto him like a lifeline. So everything's okay? Lena's voice was small, vulnerable in a way Daniel had never heard from her before. Everything looks great, but I want you to take it easy for the next few days. No strenuous activity, plenty of rest. And if you experience any heavy bleeding or severe cramping, call me immediately. They left the clinic half an hour later, both of them emotionally wrung out. In the parking garage, Lena leaned against her car, her professional composure finally cracking. I was so scared, she whispered. This morning when I saw the blood, I thought... She pressed her hands to her face. I didn't expect to want this so much. I've spent weeks trying to figure out how to make it work, all the logistics and complications, and I never let myself actually want it. But the thought of losing it... Daniel pulled her into his arms, and for once she didn't resist, just buried her face against his shoulder and let him hold her. He could feel her trembling, all the fear and relief and uncertainty pouring out of her. You're allowed to want this, he said quietly. You're allowed to be scared and excited and confused all at the same time. I don't know how to do this, she said into his shirt. How to be vulnerable, how to let someone in. I've spent my entire life building walls. Then we'll figure it out together. We don't have to have all the answers right now. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. A softening, maybe. An acknowledgement that they were more than just two people dealing with an unexpected pregnancy. They were in this together, whether they'd planned it or not. I should get back to the office, Lena said, straightening her jacket, rebuilding her armor. The Hartman deal closes in 2 days, and I need to... Lena, Dr. Walsh said to take it easy. I know, but I can't just... She stopped, shook her head. This is the biggest deal of my career. If I show any weakness now, Victor Lang will use it against me. Daniel had heard the name before, had seen Victor around the office, a senior executive who seemed to be constantly maneuvering for more power, more influence. What's his problem? He wants my position, has for years. He's just been waiting for me to slip up, and if he finds out I'm pregnant... She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew how precarious her position was. Then we're extra careful, Daniel said. We don't give him any ammunition. Lena nodded, then surprised him by leaning up and kissing his cheek. Thank you for being here, for not making this harder than it already is. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Daniel standing in the parking garage, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, wondering how he'd gotten here and where they were possibly going to end up. That evening, Daniel picked up Jake from preschool and took him to Sarah's house for dinner. Tom was home for once, and the meal was chaotic in the way that family dinners with small children always are. Spilled milk, arguments over vegetables, excited chatter about things that seemed monumentally important to 5-year-olds. After dinner, while the kids played in the living room, Daniel helped Sarah clean up the kitchen. "You look stressed," she observed, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Lena had some bleeding this morning. We went to the doctor. Baby's fine, but—" He scrubbed a hand through his hair. "It was terrifying, Sarah, for both of us. Are you two getting closer? Like, actually building something here?" Daniel thought about Lena crying in his arms, about the way she'd kissed his cheek, about the slow thawing he could feel happening between them. "Maybe. I don't know. We're trying to figure it out." "Does she know about your feelings for her?" "What feelings?" Sarah gave him a look. "Don't play dumb. You've been half in love with her since you started whatever this is 6 months ago. The question is whether you're going to actually do something about it or keep pretending this is just about the baby." Daniel wanted to argue, to insist that it was more complicated than that, but Sarah knew him too well. The truth was, he'd been attracted to Lena from the first time they'd worked together late one night, when she'd let her guard down enough to laugh at one of his jokes, and he'd seen the real person beneath the executive armor. "It doesn't matter how I feel," he said quietly. "Lena's not looking for a relationship. She's made that clear. People change, situations change. Maybe she just needs someone to show her it's safe to let her walls down." Before Daniel could respond, Jake came running into the kitchen. "Daddy, come play Legos with us!" Daniel let himself be pulled away, grateful for the distraction, but Sarah's words stayed with him for the rest of the evening. The Hartman deal closed on Wednesday to great fanfare. The firm threw a celebration in the main conference room, champagne flowing freely as executives congratulated each other on a successful negotiation. Daniel attended out of obligation, standing at the edges of the room and watching Lena hold court in the center, gracious and brilliant and completely in her element. Victor Lang stood nearby, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, as he watched Lena accept congratulations from the firm's managing partners. Daniel didn't like the way Victor looked at her, like she was an obstacle to be removed rather than a colleague to respect. When the celebration finally wound down, Daniel made his way toward the exit, only to be intercepted by Victor. "Daniel Reed, right?" Victor's handshake was too firm, performative. "Good work on those subsidiary contracts. Very thorough." "Thank you," Daniel said carefully, unsure where this was going. "You work closely with Lena, don't you, on several projects?" Warning bells went off in Daniel's head. "We collaborate occasionally, yes. She's impressive, isn't she? So dedicated. I sometimes worry she works too hard, doesn't take care of herself." Victor's tone was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "Have you noticed her seeming tired lately? Off her game at all?" Daniel kept his expression neutral. "Not that I've noticed. She seems as sharp as ever." "Well, if you do notice anything unusual, feel free to mention it to me. I'd hate for her to burn out at such a critical point in her career." Victor clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "Good to talk to you, Reed." He walked away, leaving Daniel with the distinct impression that he'd just been warned or tested or both. Daniel pulled out his phone and texted Lena. "Victor Lang just cornered me, asking if you seem tired or off lately. Be careful." Her response came quickly. "I know, he's been circling. Thanks for the heads up." Daniel pocketed his phone and headed home, unease settling in his stomach. They'd been so careful to keep the pregnancy secret, to maintain their professional distance, but Victor was clearly suspicious of something, and men like Victor didn't need proof to cause damage. They just needed doubt. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel watched Victor more carefully, noticed how he seemed to be everywhere Lena was, observing, taking notes, looking for weaknesses. Lena handled it with her usual grace, but Daniel could see the strain it was causing, the way she pushed herself harder to prove she was still at the top of her game. They were nearly 11 weeks along now, approaching the end of the first trimester. Lena's morning sickness had gotten worse, and twice Daniel had found her in the bathroom near her office, looking pale and shaken. Each time she'd waved him off, insisted she was fine, then gone right back to work as if nothing had happened. "You need to slow down," Daniel said after the second incident, following her back to her office despite her protests. "I can't. Not with Victor watching my every move." "Lena, you heard what Dr. Walsh said. You need to take care of yourself." "I am taking care of myself. I'm taking my vitamins. I'm eating. When I can keep food down, I'm doing everything right." She sank into her desk chair, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "But I can't show weakness, not now." Daniel crouched beside her chair, making her look at him. "Taking care of yourself isn't weakness. And if Victor can't see that, then he's not worthy of the position he wants." "That's not how the world works, Daniel. You know that." He did know that. Had seen enough corporate politics to understand that perception mattered more than reality, that showing any vulnerability could be fatal to a career. But he also knew that Lena was running herself into the ground, and something had to give. That Friday, Daniel's phone rang just as he was leaving to pick up Jake from preschool. Lena's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," he answered. "Everything okay? Can you come to my place tonight? After Jake's asleep? We need to talk." The serious tone of her voice made his stomach clench. "Yeah, of course. What's wrong?" "Not on the phone, just, can you come? I'll be there by 9. Daniel spent the rest of the evening in a state of low-level anxiety, going through the motions of dinner and bath time and bedtime stories while his mind spun through possibilities. Had something happened with the baby? Had Victor found out? Had Lena changed her mind about everything? By the time he got Jake settled and called Sarah to come stay at his apartment, his nerves were shot. He drove to Lena's loft trying to prepare himself for whatever news she had, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found when she opened the door. Lena was crying, not the controlled tears from the doctor's office, but full gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Daniel pulled her into his arms immediately, kicking the door shut behind him. "What happened?" he demanded. "Is it the baby? Are you okay?" "The baby's fine," she managed between sobs. "I'm fine. It's just—" She pulled back, swiping at her face. "Victor knows. I don't know how, but he knows." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What did he say?" "He didn't say anything directly. He just—" She moved to the couch, sinking down onto it. "He made a comment in a meeting today about how important it is to maintain focus during critical projects, how personal distractions can compromise professional judgment. Then he looked right at me and smiled." "That's not proof that he knows," Daniel said, sitting beside her. "He knows, Daniel. I could see it in his eyes. He's just waiting for the right moment to use it against me." Daniel thought about Victor's questions at the celebration, about the way he'd been watching Lena, and realized she was probably right. But knowing something and being able to prove it were two different things. "Then we need to get ahead of it," Daniel said. "Tell the managing partners before Victor can weaponize it." "Are you insane? If I tell them I'm pregnant with your child, they'll fire one of us. Probably you, because I'm more valuable to the firm, and then you'll resent me forever, and our child will grow up in a broken situation just like—" She stopped, pressed her hands to her face. "I'm sorry. I can't think straight." Daniel recognized the spiral, had seen it in himself after Emma died, that overwhelming fear that every decision would lead to catastrophe. He took Lena's hands gently, making her look at him. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "We're going to figure this out. We're not going to let Victor control this narrative. But first you need to breathe. Can you do that for me?" Lena nodded, taking a shaky breath, then another. Slowly her panic began to recede, replaced by the analytical mind that made her so good at her job. "We need a plan," she said finally. "A way to frame this that protects both of us." They spent the next 2 hours strategizing, running through scenarios, preparing for every possible outcome. By the time Daniel left, well past midnight, they had the skeleton of a plan. Not perfect, but better than nothing. As Daniel drove home through the empty streets, he thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. He and Lena had gone from careful distance to something that looked almost like partnership, forced together by circumstance, but building something real in the process. He thought about Sarah's question, whether he was going to do something about his feelings or keep pretending this was just about the baby. And he realized that somewhere along the way, in doctors' offices and parking garages and late-night strategy sessions, His feelings had stopped being something he could ignore. But feelings didn't matter if Victor destroyed both their careers before they had a chance to figure out what they could be to each other. Monday morning arrived with ominous efficiency, and Daniel walked into Morrison and Hayes knowing that the careful balance they'd maintained was about to shatter. He just didn't know how spectacularly until his security badge failed at the elevator and two men from building security appeared at his side, their expressions professionally neutral, but their presence unmistakably hostile. "Mr. Reed, we need you to come with us." Daniel's first instinct was to resist, to demand an explanation, but years of navigating corporate bureaucracy had taught him that security guards were just following orders. The real battle wouldn't be fought in the lobby. "Of course," he said calmly, ignoring the stares from colleagues streaming past him into the building. "Can you tell me what this is about?" "HR will explain everything," the taller guard said, his hand hovering near Daniel's elbow without quite touching. "This way, please." They escorted him not to the HR department on the 15th floor, but to a small conference room on the 3rd floor that Daniel had never been in before. The kind of room reserved for disciplinary meetings and terminations. All beige walls and uncomfortable chairs designed to make you want to leave as quickly as possible. A woman Daniel didn't recognize sat at the table, flanked by two men in expensive suits. She had that particular look of corporate HR, professionally pleasant, utterly ruthless when necessary. "Mr. Reed, I'm Jennifer Morris, Senior Director of Human Resources. These are our attorneys, Mr. Patterson and Mr. Hughes." She gestured to the empty chair across from them. "Please, sit down." Daniel sat, his mind racing through possibilities. They knew about the pregnancy. That much was obvious. The question was how much they knew and what they planned to do about it. "Mr. Reed, we've become aware of some concerning allegations regarding your conduct with a senior member of our executive team." Jennifer's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Specifically, allegations of an inappropriate relationship with Lena Whitmore that may constitute a violation of our ethics policy." "May I ask who made these allegations?" Daniel kept his voice steady, channeling every ounce of the composure he'd learned in courtrooms. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. What I can tell you is that we take these matters very seriously. Morrison and Hayes has a strict policy against relationships between employees where there's a significant power differential." Daniel had read that policy when he was hired, understood its purpose, but the careful language told him everything he needed to know. They were building a case against him, not Lena. He was the expendable one. "Ms. Whitmore and I have worked together on several projects," Daniel said carefully. "Our relationship has always been professional." "So you're denying any romantic or sexual involvement with Ms. Whitmore?" The trap was obvious. If he lied and they had proof, he'd be fired for dishonesty. If he told the truth, he'd be fired for the relationship. Either way, they'd already made their decision. "I'd like to speak with a lawyer before answering any more questions." Jennifer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "That's your right, of course. However, I should inform you that as of this moment, you're on administrative leave pending the outcome of our investigation. Your access to the building and all company systems has been revoked. You'll need to surrender your badge and any company property in your possession." Daniel felt the world tilt slightly. Administrative leave was just a polite way of saying suspended, and everyone knew that suspensions almost never ended with reinstatement. They were clearing him out, making an example, protecting their valuable executive at the expense of the replaceable analyst. "I understand," he said, because there was nothing else to say. One of the security guards appeared at the door with a cardboard box. Daniel recognized it for what it was, the universal symbol of corporate termination. He thought about all the personal items in his office upstairs, 3 years of accumulated proof that he'd worked here, mattered here. "Someone will escort you to collect your belongings," Jennifer said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Mr. Reed." She wasn't sorry. None of them were. This was just business, just the machinery of corporate self-protection grinding someone smaller into dust. The walk to his office felt like a perp walk, the security guard trailing him while coworkers quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Daniel had seen this happen to other people, had felt that same uncomfortable mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't him. Now he was on the other side of it, and it was worse than he'd imagined. His office was small and windowless, the kind of space they gave to people who were competent but not important. Daniel packed quickly, photos of Jake, a coffee mug Sarah had given him, the small collection of case law books he'd accumulated. Everything that had seemed permanent this morning now fit in a single cardboard box. His desk phone rang as he was packing the last items. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up. "Daniel, it's me." Lena's voice was tight with tension. "Are you okay? I just heard. I'm fine. They're escorting me out." "This is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have—" "Not on this line," Daniel interrupted. "We'll talk later." He hung up before she could respond, before the emotion in her voice could crack through his carefully maintained composure. The security guard was watching him with professional sympathy, probably seeing this scene play out a dozen times a year. The elevator ride down was mercifully empty. Daniel clutched his box and stared at his distorted reflection in the steel doors, seeing a man who just lost everything he'd worked for since Emma died. The job that paid for Jake's preschool and their small apartment and the life they'd carefully built. Gone. Just like that. Outside, the morning was disgustingly beautiful. Clear sky, perfect temperature, the kind of day that should have meant good things. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, displaced and disoriented, while other people streamed past him into the building he was no longer allowed to enter. His phone buzzed, a text from Lena. "I'm so sorry. This is Victor's doing. I'm going to fix this." Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to think that there was some way to undo this disaster, but he understood corporate politics well enough to know that once the machinery started moving, it rarely stopped. He texted back, "Don't do anything rash, Amessa, think about the baby first." He walked to his car feeling like he was moving through water, everything slow and muffled and wrong. Inside the car, he finally let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not just the job loss, though that was catastrophic enough, but the humiliation, the public nature of his removal, the message it sent to everyone who'd witnessed it. Daniel Reed had done something wrong, and this was his punishment. His phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and Daniel realized someone must have already told her. News traveled fast in their circle. "I heard," she said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "They put me on administrative leave, took my badge, cleaned out my office, the whole routine." Daniel heard his own voice, flat and distant. "It's over, Sarah." "What happened? What did they say?" "That there were allegations about my relationship with Lena. They didn't ask for my side of the story, didn't give me a chance to explain. They'd already made their decision." "Those bastards!" Sarah's anger was fierce and immediate. "Can you fight this? File a grievance or something?" "With what resources? They have teams of lawyers. I'm just a single dad who can't afford to be unemployed." The reality of that statement hit him hard. He had maybe 3 months of savings if he was careful, and that was before factoring in the costs of a new baby. Without his job, how was he supposed to pay child support? How was he supposed to be there for this child the way he'd promised Lena? "Come over tonight," Sarah said, "after Jake's asleep. We need to figure out your next steps." Daniel agreed and hung up, then sat in his car for a long time, trying to gather the pieces of himself enough to drive home. He thought about calling Lena, about demanding to know what she was planning to do, but he didn't have the emotional energy for that conversation yet. Instead, he drove to the preschool and picked up Jake hours early, surprising his son and confusing the teachers who expected him to be at work. Jake was delighted by the unexpected early pickup, chattering excitedly about getting to go to the park in the middle of the day. At the park, Daniel pushed Jake on the swings and tried to smile, tried to be present, but part of him was still in that conference room, still feeling the moment his badge failed at the elevator, still processing the speed with which his carefully constructed life had collapsed. "Daddy, are you sad?" Jake asked from the swing, his perceptiveness cutting through Daniel's attempts to hide his emotions. "A little bit, buddy, but I'm okay." "Did something bad happen?" Daniel thought about lying, about protecting his son from adult problems, but Jake had already lost one parent. He deserved honesty, even if it was simplified. "I'm having some trouble at work," Daniel said carefully, "but we're going to be fine. I promise." Jake seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to swinging, but Daniel saw him glance back several times, checking to make sure his father was still there, still okay. It reminded Daniel viscerally of the months after Emma died, when Jake had been terrified of letting Daniel out of his sight, afraid that he might disappear too. That evening, after dinner and bath time and extra bedtime stories, Daniel finally allowed himself to check his phone. There were dozens of messages, from Lena, from Sarah, from a few colleagues expressing carefully worded sympathy. One message stood out, from a number he didn't recognize. "This is what happens when people forget their place. Consider it a lesson learned. V. Victor." The bastard couldn't even have the decency to hide behind anonymity. Daniel deleted the message and called Lena. She answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" she asked immediately. "Home. Jake just went to bed." "I've been going crazy. I tried to talk to Jennifer Morris, but she wouldn't tell me anything. And when I pushed, she implied that I should distance myself from the situation if I wanted to protect my own position." Lena's voice shook with anger. "This is Victor's doing. It has to be." "The question is how he found out," Daniel said. "We were so careful." "I don't know. Maybe he was following one of us. Maybe he got access to my medical records somehow, though that should be impossible." She paused. "Daniel, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to go to the managing partners and tell them the truth. That this was consensual, that there's no misconduct, that Victor is manipulating the situation for his own gain." "Lena, no. If you do that, you'll just get yourself fired too. Then where will we be? Two unemployed parents with a baby on the way?" "So what? I'm just supposed to let them destroy your career to protect mine." "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "That's exactly what you're supposed to do. You're the one who's pregnant, who needs the health insurance, who has the position to actually provide for this child. I can find another job. You can't easily replace what you have at Morrison and Hayes." The line went silent for a long moment. Then Lena said quietly, "I hate this. I hate that Victor gets to win. He hasn't won yet. We just need to be smart about how we respond." They talked for another hour, Daniel gradually talking Lena down from her impulse to stage a dramatic confrontation. By the time they hung up, she'd agreed to wait to see how the investigation played out, to protect her own position for the sake of the baby. But Daniel could hear the strain in her voice, the guilt eating at her. She was used to fighting her own battles, used to winning through force of will and strategic brilliance. Being asked to stand down, to let someone else take the hit, went against every instinct she had. The next morning, Daniel woke to find his phone flooded with notifications. He'd been tagged in multiple posts on the firm's internal social platform, all of them from the night before. His stomach sank as he opened them. Someone had leaked details of his suspension. Not official details, the kind that HR would carefully control, but gossip, speculation, innuendo. The posts didn't name Lena directly, but they didn't need to. Everyone who read them would be able to connect the dots. Daniel scrolled through the comments, feeling sick. Some people defended him, said the rumors were baseless, but others piled on. Anonymous colleagues, suddenly brave enough to share every perceived slight, every professional mistake, painting a picture of someone who'd been incompetent all along. It was character assassination, public and permanent, and there was nothing Daniel could do to stop it. He was still staring at his phone when Sarah called. "Don't read the comments," she said immediately. "Too late." "Daniel, this is vicious. Someone's orchestrating this, making sure your reputation is destroyed so thoroughly that you can't fight back." "Victor," Daniel said, "it has to be. He's making sure that even if I'm reinstated, no one will want to work with me. Can you prove it?" "How?" "He's too smart to leave fingerprints." Sarah made a frustrated sound. "There has to be something we can do, some way to fight back." But Daniel couldn't think of one. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and rapidly running out of options. The only thing he had left was his dignity, and even that felt precarious. Over the next few days, Daniel fell into a strange limbo. He couldn't look for new jobs without references from Morrison and Hayes, and no one there would risk their own position to vouch for someone who'd been publicly disgraced. He couldn't afford a lawyer to challenge the suspension. He couldn't even properly defend himself without making things worse. All he could do was wait, and waiting had never been something Daniel was good at. He spent his days taking care of Jake, going through the motions of normal life while his world crumbled around him. Preschool drop-off and pickup, meals and playtime, bedtime routines that felt like the only stable things left in his universe. Lena texted him regularly, updates about the baby, about her own situation at work. She was 12 weeks along now, safely into the second trimester, and her morning sickness was finally starting to ease. But the joy that should have come with reaching that milestone was overshadowed by the mess Victor had created. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after his suspension, Daniel received an email from HR. The investigation was complete. He was required to attend a final meeting on Friday afternoon to discuss the findings. He knew what that meant. Final meetings weren't for reinstatement. They were for formalization, for making the termination official, for dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the end of his career at Morrison and Hayes. Daniel called Lena from his car after dropping Jake at preschool. "They're going to fire me tomorrow," he said without preamble. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Final meeting with HR. That's what that means." He heard her take a sharp breath. "I'm going to be there." "Lena, that's a terrible idea. I don't care. I'm not letting them do this without fighting back. I've already scheduled a meeting with the board for tomorrow morning." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to tell them everything. About us, about the baby, about Victor's manipulation. I'm going to force them to choose between protecting a bully and doing what's right." "You'll destroy your own career." "Maybe, but I can't live with myself if I don't try." Daniel wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could backfire, but he heard the determination in her voice and knew there was no talking her out of it. Lena had made her decision, and once she committed to something, she saw it through. "Okay," he said quietly, "then I'll be there too." Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Daniel dressed in his best suit, the one he'd worn to court back when he'd briefly practiced litigation, and arranged for Sarah to pick up Jake from preschool. He didn't tell his son what was happening, didn't want to worry him, just promised they'd do something fun this weekend. The drive to Morrison and Hayes felt surreal, like returning to a crime scene. Daniel had to check in at the security desk like a visitor, getting a temporary badge that marked him as an outsider. The irony wasn't lost on him. He went straight to the 15th floor, to the executive wing where the board meetings were held. The receptionist looked surprised to see him, but didn't stop him from taking a seat in the waiting area. At exactly 9 o'clock, Lena emerged from her office. She looked like she was going into battle. Black power suit, hair pulled back severely, every inch the executive who commanded rooms. But when her eyes met Daniel's, he saw the fear beneath the armor. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "The board is already in session. They granted me 15 minutes to present my case." "And then what?" "Then they decide whether Victor's manipulation is worth protecting or whether they're willing to actually uphold their own ethics policies." Before Daniel could respond, the conference room doors opened and a senior partner named Robert Chen appeared. He looked between them with an expression that Daniel couldn't quite read. "Ms. Whitmore, the board is ready for you." His eyes flicked to Daniel. "Mr. Reed, you're not authorized to be in this building." "He's with me," Lena said, standing, "as a material witness to my testimony." Robert hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but I should warn you both, this is highly irregular." They followed him into the conference room, and Daniel felt like he was walking into an execution. The Morrison and Hayes board of directors sat around a massive table, 12 people who held the power to destroy or save careers with a single vote. Victor Lang sat at the far end, looking supremely confident. Lena walked to the head of the table with her shoulders back, every movement radiating the kind of authority that had made her so successful. Daniel took a seat along the wall, relegated to observer status. "Thank you for granting me this time," Lena began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to address serious allegations of misconduct that have been leveled at Daniel Reed, and to present evidence that these allegations are part of a coordinated campaign to undermine both Mr. Reed's career and my own position within this firm." Victor leaned forward slightly, his expression one of polite interest, but Daniel saw the tension in his shoulders. "3 months ago, I learned that I'm pregnant," Lena continued, and Daniel saw several board members exchange glances. "The father is Daniel Reed. Our relationship began over a year ago, long before either of us held positions that would constitute a power differential as defined by firm policy. It has been conducted with complete discretion and has never interfered with our professional responsibilities." "Ms. Whitmore," Robert interrupted gently, "while we appreciate your honesty, I'm not sure how this relates to... It relates because someone leaked my private medical information to Victor Lang, who then used that information to orchestrate Mr. Reed's suspension. Lena's voice hardened. This isn't about ethics policy violations. This is about corporate sabotage. Victor stood smoothly. That's a serious accusation, Lena. I hope you have evidence to support it. I do. Lena pulled out her phone, connecting it to the room's display system. These are emails from your personal account to Jennifer Morris in HR, sent 2 weeks ago, detailing information about my pregnancy that you could only have obtained through illegal access to my medical records. The emails appeared on the screen, and Daniel watched Victor's confident expression falter. The messages were damning, detailed discussions of how to use Lena's pregnancy to remove Daniel without directly implicating Victor himself. Where did you get those? Victor demanded. From IT, after I filed a formal request for an audit of all communications referencing my name. Lena's smile was sharp. You really should have used the firm's encrypted system instead of your personal email. The room erupted in murmurs. Robert Chen was reading the emails on his tablet, his expression growing darker with each sentence. Other board members were conferring in hushed tones. This is outrageous, Victor said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Those emails could have been doctored. They weren't, a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see the firm's head of IT standing there, a woman named Patricia Kim. I conducted the audit myself at Ms. Whitmore's request. The emails are authentic, and our logs show Mr. Lang accessed Ms. Whitmore's health insurance claims through the administrative portal multiple times over the past month. Victor's face went white. I have administrative access for operational purposes. Not to individual employee medical records, Patricia said flatly. That's a HIPAA violation, and it's grounds for immediate termination. The room fell silent. Daniel sat frozen, watching the careful architecture of Victor's conspiracy collapse in real time. Lena remained at the head of the table, her expression calm but her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. Robert Chen stood. Victor, I think you should step outside while the board discusses this matter. Robert, you have to understand I was trying to protect the firm. Outside now! Victor left, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The moment the door closed behind him, the board erupted in urgent conversation. Daniel met Lena's eyes across the room and saw exhaustion mixed with relief. The deliberation took less than 10 minutes. When Robert called both Lena and Daniel to stand before the board, his expression was grave but not hostile. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Reed, the board has reviewed the evidence you've presented, and we've reached several conclusions. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Reed, your suspension is lifted immediately, with full back pay and a formal apology for the way this situation was handled. The allegations against you were baseless and malicious. Daniel felt the tension drain from his body so fast he thought he might collapse. Victor Lang's employment with Morrison and Hayes is terminated effective immediately, Robert continued. We will be conducting a full investigation into his access to confidential records and pursuing criminal charges if warranted. He looked at Lena. Ms. Whitmore, we commend you for bringing this matter to our attention, though we wish you'd felt comfortable doing so sooner. With respect, Lena said, her voice steady, given how quickly you were willing to suspend Mr. Reed without hearing his side, I didn't feel that this board would be receptive to the truth. Several board members had the grace to look uncomfortable. Robert nodded slowly. Point taken. Moving forward, we'll be implementing new protocols to prevent this kind of abuse of power. The meeting ended with handshakes and assurances, but Daniel barely processed any of it. All he could think about was that it was over, that somehow Lena had managed to turn the tables, that they'd survived Victor's attack. In the hallway, after the board had dispersed, Lena finally let her composure crack. She leaned against the wall, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. You did it, Daniel said, moving to her side. You actually did it. I can't believe that worked. When I found those emails, I thought maybe I had a chance, but... She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I was prepared to be fired. I had my resignation letter written and everything. Daniel pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling against him. You were incredible, terrifying, but incredible. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him destroy you for something we both chose. They stood there in the empty hallway, holding each other, until Lena's breathing steadied and she pulled back, wiping her eyes. I need to get back to work, she said. There's going to be fallout from this, and I need to manage it. Lena, take the rest of the day. You've been through enough. She shook her head. If I leave now, people will think I'm weak. I need to show them that I'm still in control, still capable. She straightened her jacket, rebuilding her armor. But tonight, can you come over? We should talk about what happens next. Yeah, of course. They parted ways at the elevator, Lena heading back to her office, Daniel heading to HR to complete the paperwork for his reinstatement. As he walked through the building, he noticed people staring, whispering. The news was already spreading, and Daniel knew that Monday morning would bring a whole new level of scrutiny. But for now, he had his job back. He had his dignity back. And most importantly, he and Lena had weathered the storm together, had chosen to fight for each other instead of letting fear and corporate politics tear them apart. It wasn't a perfect victory. There would be consequences, complications, difficult conversations ahead. But it was a start. Daniel returned to Morrison and Hayes the following Monday to a reception that was equal parts supportive and uncomfortable. His colleagues didn't quite know how to act around him. Some offered congratulations on his reinstatement, others avoided eye contact entirely, and a few brave souls asked directly what had happened. Daniel kept his answers brief and professional, unwilling to give the rumor mill any more fuel than it already had. His office looked exactly as he'd left it, though someone had dusted and watered the small plant on his desk. A new laptop sat waiting for him, his access codes reset, a stack of contracts that needed review already piling up. It was as if the past 2 weeks had been erased, at least on the surface. But beneath that surface, everything had changed. Daniel was reviewing a merger agreement when his desk phone rang. Lena's assistant, an efficient woman named Patricia, who'd always treated Daniel with polite distance, sounded almost warm when she spoke. Mr. Reed, Mrs. Whitmore would like to see you in her office at 3 o'clock, if you're available. I'll be there, Daniel said, checking his watch. That gave him 2 hours to finish the contract review and prepare himself for whatever conversation awaited him. At precisely 3, Daniel took the elevator to the executive floor. The receptionist waved him through without the scrutiny she'd always shown before, and Patricia actually smiled when he approached Lena's office. Go right in, she said. She's expecting you. Lena was standing by her windows when Daniel entered, looking out over the city with her arms wrapped around herself. She'd taken off her suit jacket, and Daniel could see the slight curve of her stomach beneath her silk blouse. Barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but undeniable proof that time was moving forward, whether they were ready or not. Close the door, she said, without turning around. Daniel complied, then waited. After a moment, Lena turned to face him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the past few weeks carved into the lines around her mouth. Thank you for coming, she said formally, then seemed to catch herself. Sorry, I've been in meetings all morning and I can't seem to turn off the executive voice. It's okay. Daniel moved closer but maintained a respectful distance, still unsure of the boundaries between them. How are you holding up? Honestly, I have no idea. Lena sank into the chair behind her desk, and for the first time since Daniel had known her, she looked small, vulnerable. The board is supportive, at least publicly, but I can feel the shift in how people see me. I'm no longer just the brilliant executive. I'm the pregnant woman who had an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. I was never your subordinate, Daniel said quietly. We work in different departments. There's no direct reporting relationship. That's not how people see it. And technically, as an EVP, I have authority over every analyst in the firm. She rubbed her temples. The board made it clear that there can't be any perception of favoritism moving forward, which means we can't work together directly anymore. Daniel had expected this, but it still stung. Some of his best work had come from collaborating with Lena, from the intellectual challenge of keeping up with her sharp mind and strategic thinking. I understand, he said. I also need to tell you something else. Lena pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. The board offered me a promotion. Chief Operating Officer. It would make me the highest-ranking woman in the firm's history. Daniel opened the folder and scanned the offer letter. The salary was staggering, the responsibilities enormous. It was everything Lena had been working toward for years. "That's incredible," he said, genuinely happy for her despite his confusion about why she seemed so conflicted. "You've earned this." "Have I? Or is this their way of controlling the narrative? Show that they support me publicly while quietly ensuring I'm too busy with operational responsibilities to threaten anyone's position?" She shook her head. "I'm sorry, that's paranoid. It's just, Victor's gone, but the culture that allowed him to thrive is still here. And I'm about to become a very visible example of what happens when you don't fit the traditional mold." Daniel understood what she wasn't saying. She would be the pregnant COO, the woman who'd had a baby with a lower-level employee, the subject of every whispered conversation and speculative email. Her competence would be constantly questioned, her decisions scrutinized through the lens of her personal life. "You're going to accept it anyway," Daniel said, reading the determination beneath her doubt. "Of course I am. I didn't fight this hard to back down now." Lena stood and moved back to the windows, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "But I need to know where we stand, Daniel. Not just professionally, but—" She gestured vaguely. "This baby is going to be here in 5 months. We need to make decisions about custody, about co-parenting, about what kind of relationship we're actually going to have." Daniel had been avoiding this conversation, preferring the comfortable ambiguity of their current situation to the harsh clarity of defining something he didn't fully understand himself. But Lena was right. They couldn't keep drifting indefinitely. "What do you want?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent my entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of complication. Personal relationships that require compromise and vulnerability and trust. I'm terrible at all of that. But I also know that I can't do this alone, and I don't want to." Daniel crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. The city sprawled below them, millions of people navigating their own complicated lives, their own impossible situations. "When Emma died, I thought I'd never let anyone get that close again," he said quietly. "It hurt too much, losing her. So I built walls around myself and Jake, kept everything manageable and controlled. And then you happened, and I told myself it was just physical, just convenient, that I could keep it separate from the rest of my life." He turned to look at her. "But I can't anymore. And honestly, I don't want to." Lena met his eyes, and Daniel saw fear and hope warring in her expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we should stop pretending this is just about the baby. We should figure out if there's something real here, something worth building on. And if there isn't, if we try and it doesn't work, then we'll figure out how to co-parent anyway, the way millions of people do. But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Lena was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. Then she said, "I'm scared, Daniel. I've never done this before. The relationship part, the family part. I don't know how to be the person you and this baby are going to need." "Neither do I," Daniel admitted. "I have no idea how to blend my life with Jake into whatever this is going to be. I don't know how to date someone while co-parenting a newborn. I don't have a roadmap for any of this. So we're both terrified." "Completely," Lena laughed, a real laugh this time, and some of the tension between them eased. "That's not very reassuring." "No, but it's honest." Daniel reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "And I think honesty is the only chance we have of making this work." She squeezed his hand, then pulled him closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding each other while the city buzzed below them. Finally, Lena pulled back. "I should get back to work. I have a meeting with the transition team in 20 minutes. When can I see you again? Outside of work?" "Tonight? I could come to your place. It's probably time I met Jake anyway, if we're going to do this properly." Daniel felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of introducing Lena to his son, of opening that carefully protected part of his life to someone new. But she was right. They couldn't keep operating in separate spheres indefinitely. "Okay, come over around 6. I'll make dinner." That evening, Daniel found himself in the peculiar position of cleaning his apartment with the same nervous energy he'd felt as a teenager before a first date. He'd explained to Jake that morning that a friend from work was coming over for dinner, carefully avoiding any mention of babies or relationships or the complicated reality of what Lena actually meant to them. Jake had been excited at the prospect of a visitor, immediately launching into plans for what games they should play and which of his Lego creations he should show off. Daniel had gently suggested they see how dinner went first, but he could see his son's mind already spinning with possibilities. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Daniel took a breath, then opened the door to find Lena standing in his hallway looking more nervous than he'd ever seen her. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, and she looked younger somehow, more approachable. "Hi," she said, holding up a bottle of sparkling cider. "I figured wine was out, so I brought this instead." "Come in." Daniel stepped aside, very aware that his modest apartment was a far cry from her downtown loft. The furniture was secondhand, the walls needed painting, and there were Legos scattered across the living room floor despite his best efforts to clean up. If Lena noticed the difference in their living situations, she didn't show it. She stepped inside carefully, her eyes taking in the photos on the walls, Jake at various ages, Emma smiling in the few pictures Daniel had kept, Sarah's family at holidays. "Nice place," she said, and Daniel couldn't tell if she was being polite or sincere. Before he could respond, Jake came barreling out of his room, skidding to a stop when he saw Lena. He looked between her and Daniel with wide eyes. "Hi," Jake said shyly, suddenly remembering his manners. "I'm Jake." "Hi, Jake. I'm Lena. Your dad and I work together. Do you like Legos?" Lena smiled, the first genuine smile Daniel had seen from her all day. "I used to build with them when I was younger. I was never very good at following the instructions, though." "Me neither." Jake's face lit up. "Daddy says I'm creative. Do you want to see my spaceship?" "I'd love to." Daniel watched as his son grabbed Lena's hand and dragged her toward the living room, chattering excitedly about his latest creation. Lena followed, asking questions and actually seeming interested in Jake's enthusiastic explanations. She sat on the floor beside him, her expensive jeans getting dusty, and listened with the same focus she brought to board meetings. Something in Daniel's chest loosened at the sight. He hadn't realized how much he'd been worrying about whether Lena would know how to interact with Jake, whether she'd be patient enough, interested enough. But watching her now, he saw a side of her he'd never witnessed before. Softer, more open, genuinely engaged with his son's 5-year-old logic. Dinner was simple. Pasta with sauce Daniel had made the night before, salad, garlic bread. Jake monopolized the conversation, telling Lena about his preschool and his friends and the field trip they were taking next week to the Science Museum. Lena asked follow-up questions, remembered details, treated Jake like a person rather than a child to be tolerated. After dinner, while Daniel cleaned up, Jake convinced Lena to help him build a new spaceship design he'd been planning. Daniel listened to their conversation from the kitchen, Jake's excited chatter and Lena's thoughtful responses, and felt something shift in his understanding of their situation. This could work. Against all odds, despite all the complications, maybe they could actually build something real. When Jake started yawning around 8, Daniel initiated the bedtime routine. Jake protested, wanting to keep playing with Lena, but Daniel was firm. "Say goodnight to Lena. It's time for bed." Jake hugged Lena spontaneously, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Will you come back and visit again?" Lena looked startled by the question, then her expression softened. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd like that." "It's okay," Jake declared with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old. "Daddy needs more friends." After Daniel got Jake settled in bed with the usual rotation of stories and water and one more bathroom trip, he returned to the living room to find Lena sitting on the couch, looking pensive. "He's wonderful," she said as Daniel sat beside her. "Smart and kind and so full of energy. Emma would have been proud." The mention of Emma's name didn't sting the way it once had. She would have loved watching him grow up. She always wanted a big family, lots of kids running around causing chaos. And instead you got this. One child you're raising alone and another on the way with someone you barely know. "I know you better than you think," Daniel said. "I've seen you under pressure, seen how you strategize and solve problems. I've seen you scared and brave. I know you're terrible at asking for help and that you work too hard when you're stressed. I know you like your coffee black and that you hate small talk, and that you have this thing where you tap your pen against your desk when you're thinking through a complex problem. Lena looked at him with surprise. I didn't realize you were paying that much attention. I've been paying attention to you since the first time we worked together. I just didn't let myself think about what that meant. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I watched you with Jake tonight, and I saw something I've never seen at work. How patient you are, how present. You really listen to him, take his ideas seriously even when they're completely illogical. And I thought, this baby is going to be so lucky to have you as a father. What about as a mother? Daniel asked gently. You were great with Jake tonight. I was terrified the entire time. I kept thinking I was going to say something wrong or not understand what he wanted, or... She shook her head. How do you know what to do? How do you know when to be firm and when to be flexible? You don't. You just make your best guess and hope you get it right more often than you get it wrong. Daniel took her hand. And you won't be doing it alone. We'll figure it out together. Lena leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Daniel could feel her breathing, the steady rhythm of it, and thought about how different this was from their previous encounters. No urgency, no carefully maintained distance, just two people learning how to be together. I should go, Lena said eventually, though she didn't move. It's getting late. Or you could stay. She lifted her head to look at him. Daniel, not like that. Just stay. We could watch a movie or just talk. I'd like you to stay. Lena studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'd like that too. They ended up watching a documentary about architecture that Lena had been meaning to see, her running commentary on the various buildings keeping Daniel entertained even when the subject matter grew dry. Somewhere around the halfway point, she fell asleep against his shoulder, her breathing deep and even, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach. Daniel let her sleep, content to just sit there holding her, feeling the weight of her trust in this moment of vulnerability. When the documentary ended, he carefully shifted her into a more comfortable position, covering her with a blanket from the back of the couch. She stirred slightly, blinking up at him in confusion. I fell asleep. You did. You must have needed it. I should go home. But she made no move to get up. Or you could sleep in my bed and I'll take the couch. It's late, and you're exhausted. Lena seemed to consider this, then nodded. Okay, but only if you're sure. Daniel showed her to his bedroom, gave her one of his t-shirts to sleep in, and tried not to think too hard about how domestic this all felt. When he returned to the living room, he found a text from Sarah. How did it go? Better than I expected, he typed back. She's sleeping in my bed right now. The response was immediate. Details. Now. Daniel smiled and called her, keeping his voice low as he explained the evening, Jake's instant acceptance of Lena, the easy conversation over dinner, the way she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. You're falling in love with her, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Daniel started to deny it, then stopped. Maybe. I don't know. It's complicated. Love usually is. But Daniel, I haven't heard you sound this happy since before Emma died. Whatever this is with Lena, it's good for you. After they hung up, Daniel made up the couch with sheets and a pillow, then lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah's words. Was he falling in love with Lena? Or was he just caught up in the intensity of the situation, the forced intimacy of impending parenthood? He didn't have an answer, but lying there in the dark, knowing she was just down the hall in his bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for survival, not just for getting through the next day, but for something more, something better. Morning came too early, announced by Jake's running footsteps down the hallway. Daniel sat up on the couch just as his son burst into the living room, then skidded to a confused stop. Daddy, why are you sleeping here? Lena needed my bed, buddy. She was really tired. Is she still here? Jake's face lit up with excitement. I think so, but let's be quiet, okay? She might still be sleeping. But Lena emerged from the bedroom a moment later, wearing Daniel's t-shirt and looking adorably rumpled. Jake stared at her, then at Daniel, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. Good morning, Jake, Lena said, smiling. I hope it's okay that I stayed over. Your dad was kind enough to let me sleep here when I got too tired to drive home. Jake accepted this explanation without question, immediately launching into a request for pancakes. Daniel made breakfast while Lena helped Jake set the table, and the three of them ate together in the small kitchen, the conversation easy and natural. Watching Lena interact with his son, seeing her laugh at Jake's jokes and help him cut his pancakes, Daniel felt something click into place. This wasn't just about the baby anymore. Wasn't just about figuring out custody arrangements and co-parenting logistics. This was about building a family, messy and complicated and nothing like what he'd imagined, but real nonetheless. After breakfast, Lena reluctantly said she needed to go home and change before heading to the office. Jake hugged her goodbye, making her promise to visit again soon, and Daniel walked her to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for last night, for letting me be part of this. You are part of this. You have been since that night in your kitchen with the pregnancy test." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Daniel felt the last of his walls crumble. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm really scared, Daniel, of messing this up, of not being enough." "Me too, but we'll figure it out together." After she left, Daniel cleaned up breakfast while Jake played in the living room. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "I meant what I said. He's wonderful, and so are you." Daniel smiled and typed back, "Same goes for you. See you tomorrow at work?" "Actually, about that, I need to tell you something." Daniel's heart sank. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But the board meeting yesterday, they want me to make a public statement about the pregnancy. Get ahead of the rumors before they spin out of control." Daniel understood the logic, even as his stomach twisted with anxiety. Going public meant scrutiny, meant every aspect of their relationship becoming fodder for office gossip. But Lena was right. They couldn't hide it much longer anyway. "When?" he asked. "Monday. Staff meeting. I wanted you to know first. Do you want me there?" "I need you there. We're in this together, remember?" Monday morning arrived with the weight of a reckoning. Daniel dressed carefully, aware that from this point forward, he wouldn't just be Daniel Reed, senior legal analyst. He'd be Daniel Reed, the father of Lena Whitmore's baby, the man who'd somehow ended up in a relationship with the firm's new COO. The staff meeting was held in the main auditorium, a quarterly gathering where senior management shared updates and strategic initiatives. Daniel took a seat near the back, trying to be invisible, but several colleagues noticed him and whispered among themselves. Lena was the last to take the stage, looking every inch the powerful executive in a navy suit that cleverly disguised her growing belly. She spoke first about the firm's recent successes, the new initiatives she'd be leading as COO, the vision for the future. Her voice was steady, confident, commanding the room the way she always did. Then she paused, and Daniel saw her take a breath. "Before we conclude, I want to address something personal," she said. "Many of you have heard rumors over the past few weeks about my relationship with Daniel Reed. I'm here today to confirm that those rumors are true. Daniel and I are in a relationship, and we're expecting a child together." The auditorium erupted in whispers. Lena waited for the noise to die down, her expression calm but firm. "I want to be clear about several things. First, our relationship began over a year ago, long before I assumed my current role, and has been conducted with complete discretion and professionalism. Second, there has never been any conflict of interest. Daniel and I work in different departments with no reporting relationship. Third, and most importantly, what happened with Victor Lang was an egregious violation of privacy and ethical conduct, and the board has taken appropriate action." She paused again, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Daniel. "I'm sharing this information because I believe in transparency, and because I refuse to let fear or shame dictate how I live my life. I'm proud to be having this child, and I'm proud to be building a life with Daniel Reed. If anyone has concerns about my ability to perform my duties as COO while pregnant, I invite you to review my track record and come speak with me directly." The auditorium was silent now, everyone processing this unexpected announcement. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone started clapping. Others joined in, and within seconds, the applause filled the space. Not everyone was clapping. Daniel could see some faces twisted in disapproval, some people whispering behind their hands, but enough were showing support that the message was clear. After the meeting, Daniel made his way through the crowd to find Lena surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations offerers. She caught his eye over their heads and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. It took another 20 minutes before the crowd dispersed enough for Daniel to reach her side. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I think so. That was terrifying. You were perfect. We'll see. I'm sure HR is going to be fielding complaints all week." But as the days passed, the anticipated backlash never fully materialized. There were whispers, certainly, and a few pointed emails about professional conduct, but the overwhelming response was supportive. Colleagues Daniel barely knew stopped by his office to offer congratulations. Women at the firm who'd felt unable to balance career and family reached out to Lena to thank her for being visible. The following weekend, Daniel brought Jake to Lena's loft for the first time. His son's eyes went wide at the enormous space, the view, the adult elegance of everything. "You live here?" Jake asked in awe. "All by yourself?" "For now," Lena said, smiling, "but maybe not for too much longer." She and Daniel had been talking about living arrangements, about whether it made sense to find a place together or maintain separate homes. They hadn't reached a decision yet, both still nervous about moving too fast, but the conversation itself felt significant. That afternoon, while Lena worked on her laptop and Jake played with the new Lego set she'd bought him, Daniel stood at those same floor-to-ceiling windows where this had all begun and thought about how far they'd come. From that night with the pregnancy test to now, standing in Lena's home with his son, planning for a future that included all of them together. His phone buzzed. A news alert about Morrison and Hayes, about Lena's promotion and the firm's commitment to supporting working parents. The article mentioned her pregnancy in passing, framing it as evidence of progressive workplace culture rather than scandal. "Look at this," Daniel said, showing Lena the article. She read it, then laughed. "They're spinning it, making themselves look good." "Does it bother you?" "Not really. As long as the outcome is positive, I don't care about their motives." She looked at Jake, then at Daniel. "I never thought I could have this. The career and the family. I always believed I had to choose." "You don't have to choose. You just have to let people help you." "I'm learning that. Slowly." That evening, after they'd ordered takeout and Jake had fallen asleep on Lena's couch mid-movie, Daniel and Lena sat together in the quiet, her hand in his, planning the future they were building together. "I want to find a house," Lena said suddenly. "Not an apartment, a real house, with a yard for Jake and a nursery for the baby and space for all of us." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "All of us? If you want that, if you're ready for that." "I want that," Daniel said, pulling her close. "I want all of it." Outside, the city lights twinkled against the darkness, and somewhere in that vast urban landscape, their future was waiting. Complicated and messy and nothing like either of them had planned, but theirs nonetheless. House hunting with a 5-year-old and a pregnant woman turned out to be an exercise in compromise and patience that tested Daniel's organizational skills in ways Morrison and Hayes never had. Jake had strong opinions about backyards and whether there was room for a treehouse, while Lena scrutinized school districts and commute times with the same intensity she brought to corporate acquisitions. They looked at 15 houses over 3 weekends before finding the one that felt right. It was in a quiet neighborhood halfway between Daniel's apartment and Lena's downtown loft, with mature trees lining the street and the kind of front porches where neighbors actually sat and talked. The house itself needed work. The kitchen was dated, the bathrooms needed updating, and the back porch had a broken railing that made Lena nervous. But it had 4 bedrooms, a yard big enough for Jake's imagination, and a certain warmth that made it feel like home the moment they walked through the door. "This one," Jake declared, running through the empty living room with his arms spread wide. "This is the one, Daddy." Lena stood in the doorway of what would be the nursery, her hand resting on her growing belly. She was nearly 6 months along now, the pregnancy impossible to hide even in her carefully tailored work clothes. "It needs a lot of work," she said, but Daniel heard the hope in her voice. "We can handle it," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her. "Fix it up room by room, make it ours." "Ours," Lena repeated softly, testing the word. "I've never had an ours before." They made an offer that same day, And 2 weeks later, while Lena was in a board meeting and Daniel was reviewing contracts, they got the call that their bid had been accepted. Daniel texted Lena immediately, unable to contain his excitement, and she responded with a string of emojis that was so uncharacteristic he actually laughed out loud at his desk. The next month passed in a blur of packing and planning and preparation. Sarah helped Daniel sort through years of accumulated belongings, gently encouraging him to let go of things he'd been holding on to out of habit rather than need. Lena hired movers and contractors, approaching the renovation with the same strategic precision she brought to corporate restructuring. They told Jake about the baby on a Saturday morning in early June, sitting together on the floor of what would soon be his new bedroom. Daniel had been dreading this conversation, worried about how his son would react to the news that he'd no longer be the only child, that he'd have to share his father's attention and love. "Buddy, Lena and I have something important to tell you," Daniel began, glancing at Lena for support. Jake looked between them with wide eyes, clearly sensing the gravity of the moment. "Are you getting married like Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah?" The question caught them both off guard. They hadn't talked about marriage, had been too focused on the immediate challenges of blending their lives to think that far ahead. "Not right now," Lena said gently. "But we are going to be a family. Your dad and I are having a baby together. You're going to be a big brother." Jake's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like worry. "Will you still love me when the baby comes?" Daniel pulled his son into his lap, his heart breaking at the question. "Jake, listen to me. I will always love you no matter what. Having another baby doesn't mean I'll love you less. It just means our family is getting bigger. You'll always be my first son, always special. What if the baby cries all the time and you're too tired to play with me?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Lena said, scooting closer so she was part of the circle. "I know this is a big change, and it's okay to feel worried or scared or even upset about it, but I promise we're going to make sure you always feel loved and important." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who'd already learned that life could change without warning. Then he placed a small hand on Lena's belly and asked, "Is the baby in there right now?" "Yes," Lena said, covering his hand with hers. "Want to feel something cool?" She guided his hand to the right spot, and they waited. After a moment, the baby kicked, a strong movement that made Jake's eyes go wide with wonder. "It moved!" he exclaimed. "The baby moved!" "She's pretty active," Lena said, smiling at his excitement. "She?" Jake looked up at Daniel. "It's a girl?" Daniel nodded, still getting used to the idea himself. They'd found out the week before at Lena's ultrasound, had sat together holding hands while the technician confirmed what they'd both somehow already known. "A sister," Jake said, testing the word. "I'm going to have a sister." Over the following weeks, Jake's initial worry transformed into excited anticipation. He insisted on helping paint the nursery a soft yellow, leaving small handprints in the corner that Lena decided to keep rather than paint over. He helped pick out furniture and stuffed animals, offering his expertise on which toys were the best for babies. And every night before bed, he'd press his hand to Lena's stomach and tell his sister about his day, his voice soft and earnest. Watching his son bond with the baby who wasn't even born yet, seeing Lena's face soften every time Jake talked to her belly, Daniel felt pieces of himself he'd thought permanently broken start to heal. He'd loved Emma with the intensity of first love, had thought that losing her meant he'd never love anyone that way again. But what he felt for Lena was different, not less, just different. More complicated, more hard-won, built on a foundation of honesty and shared struggle rather than youthful optimism. They moved into the house on a sweltering Saturday in July, the air thick with humidity and the promise of afternoon thunderstorms. Sarah and Tom helped with the heavy lifting while their kids entertained Jake in the backyard. Lena directed traffic from the shade of the front porch, her pregnancy making it impossible for her to do much physical work, though Daniel could see the frustration in her face every time someone had to ask where something should go. By evening, the house was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture in the wrong rooms, nothing where it should be. They ordered pizza for everyone and ate sitting on the living room floor, paper plates balanced on knees, while the kids ran wild through the empty rooms. After Sarah's family left and Jake finally crashed in his new bedroom, Daniel found Lena standing in the nursery, staring at the empty crib they'd assembled that afternoon. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly. "Terrified thoughts," she corrected. "She's going to be here in 3 months, Daniel. 3 months. And I have no idea what I'm doing. I've read all the books, taken the classes, but none of it feels real. What if I'm terrible at this?" "You won't be. And even if you are at first, you'll figure it out. We both will." The baby kicked against his hands and Lena covered them with hers. "She's going to change everything." "She already has." They stood there in the quiet nursery, holding each other and the child between them, and Daniel felt the last piece of his old life slip away. He wasn't the Daniel who'd lost his wife and rebuilt his life around grief anymore. He wasn't the careful, controlled man who'd kept everyone at arm's length. He was someone new, someone learning to be vulnerable again, to trust again, to believe that happiness wasn't always followed by loss. The next morning, Daniel woke early to the sound of rain drumming against the windows. Lena was still asleep beside him, curled on her side with her hand resting on her belly, her face peaceful in a way it never was when she was awake. This was new too, waking up next to someone, sharing a bed and a life and a future. He slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and padded down the hall to check on Jake. His son was sprawled across his new bed, already making the room his own, with Legos scattered across the floor, and drawings taped to the walls. In the kitchen, Daniel made coffee and stood at the window watching the rain, thinking about all the small moments that had led them here. That night in Lena's loft with the pregnancy test, the ultrasound where they'd first heard the heartbeat, the fight with Victor that had almost destroyed everything, the slow, careful building of trust between two people who'd both learned to protect themselves from exactly this kind of vulnerability. "You're up early," Lena said from the doorway, wrapped in one of Daniel's old sweatshirts that barely fit over her belly. "Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about." She moved to stand beside him, accepting the coffee cup he handed her, decaf, which she complained about constantly but drank anyway. "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" "Good ones, mostly." Daniel turned to look at her, this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world. "I was thinking about how different this is from when Emma was pregnant with Jake. We were so young, so sure we had everything figured out. And then she died, and I realized we hadn't figured out anything. And now? Now I know we don't have it figured out. But I also know that's okay, because we're doing it together." Lena leaned against him, and they stood like that for a while, watching the rain and drinking coffee and existing in the quiet peace of early morning. Work became increasingly complicated as Lena's pregnancy progressed. She was determined to prove that being pregnant didn't make her less capable, less committed, less worthy of the COO position she'd fought so hard to earn. She worked long hours, pushed through exhaustion and discomfort, and refused to delegate anything she considered critical. Daniel watched her run herself ragged and tried to intervene, but Lena was stubborn in ways that made corporate negotiations look simple by comparison. "You need to slow down," he said one evening, finding her still at her desk at 8 o'clock when she'd promised to be home by 6. "I'm fine. I just need to finish this proposal for tomorrow's board meeting." "Lena, you've been here since 6 this morning. You're exhausted." "I said I'm fine, Daniel." Her voice had that sharp edge that meant she was past the point of reasonable discussion. Daniel sat down across from her, not leaving despite her obvious dismissal. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" "Because if I show any weakness, any sign that I can't handle this, they'll question whether I should have this position. They'll wonder if I made a mistake, if I'm going to be one of those women who has a baby and suddenly can't commit to her career. The only person questioning whether you should have this position is you." Lena looked up at him, exhaustion and frustration warring in her face. "You don't understand. You've never had to prove yourself the way I have. You've never been in a room where you're the only woman, where every mistake is magnified and every success is attributed to luck rather than skill." "You're right. I haven't. But I do understand what it's like to be so scared of failing that you can't see you're already succeeding." Daniel reached across the desk to take her hand. "You're the COO of one of the most prestigious firms in the city. You've closed deals that other people said were impossible. You've proven yourself 100 times over. The only person you still need to convince is yourself." Lena's eyes filled with tears, and she swiped at them impatiently. I hate that pregnancy makes me cry at everything. Come home. The proposal can wait until morning. It can't. It can, and it will, because your health and our daughter's health are more important than any board meeting. She stared at him for a long moment, then seemed to deflate, all the fight draining out of her. Okay, let me just send one email. That one email turned into 3, but eventually Daniel managed to get her packed up and out of the office. They drove home in comfortable silence, Lena's hand resting in his on the console between them. At home, they found Jake already asleep, and a note from Sarah saying she'd put him to bed after picking him up from summer camp. Daniel heated up leftovers while Lena changed into comfortable clothes, and they ate together at their new kitchen table, talking about nothing important, just the small details of their days, the ordinary intimacy of people learning to share their lives. After dinner, Lena disappeared into the bathroom for a shower, and Daniel cleaned up the kitchen, thinking about how these quiet moments were becoming his favorite part of the day. Not the excitement of new developments or major milestones, but the simple routine of being together. He was putting away the last of the dishes when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, Lena calling his name with an edge of panic in her voice. Daniel took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering. He found Lena standing in the bathroom doorway, one hand pressed to her stomach, her face pale. Something's wrong, she said. I'm having contractions. It's too early, Daniel. She's not supposed to come yet. Daniel's training in remaining calm under pressure kicked in immediately. He grabbed his phone, called the doctor, explained the situation. Dr. Walsh asked careful questions. How far apart were the contractions? Had her water broken? Was there any bleeding? And then told them to come to the hospital immediately. The drive felt endless. Lena breathing through contractions that were coming every 5 minutes. Daniel gripping the steering wheel and trying not to let his fear show. They were only 32 weeks along. The baby needed more time. At the hospital, they were rushed through triage and into a labor and delivery room where nurses hooked Lena up to monitors, checking the baby's heartbeat, measuring the contractions. Dr. Walsh arrived within 20 minutes, moving with calm efficiency as she examined Lena. You're having preterm labor, she confirmed. But the good news is we've caught it early, and the baby's heartbeat is strong. We're going to give you medication to try to stop the contractions and steroids to help develop the baby's lungs in case we can't stop them. What happens if we can't stop them? Lena's voice was small, scared. She's too early. Babies born at 32 weeks have excellent outcomes with proper care, Dr. Walsh assured her. But let's try to keep her in there a bit longer if we can. The next few hours were a blur of medical interventions and monitoring. The medication they gave Lena made her shaky and nauseous, but the contractions gradually slowed, then stopped. By midnight, Dr. Walsh declared the immediate crisis over, though she wanted to keep Lena in the hospital for observation. Daniel sat in the chair beside Lena's bed, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep, exhausted from the medications and the fear. He'd called Sarah from the hallway, asked her to keep Jake overnight, tried to keep his voice steady while explaining what was happening. She's going to be okay, Sarah had said with absolute certainty. Both of them are. You've already survived the worst thing that can happen to a person, Daniel. You can survive this too. Now, watching Lena sleep, Daniel thought about Sarah's words. She was right. He'd survived losing Emma, had somehow found a way to keep breathing when every instinct said to give up. He could survive this too. They both could. Lena woke around 3 in the morning, disoriented until she remembered where they were and why. Her hand immediately went to her stomach, feeling for movement. She's okay, Daniel said quietly. I've been watching the monitor. Her heartbeat's strong. I was so scared, Lena whispered. In the car, all I could think was that I'd failed her already, that I'd worked too hard and stressed too much and put my career ahead of her health. This isn't your fault. Dr. Walsh said sometimes this just happens. But what if it is my fault? What if I can't do both? Be the kind of mother she needs and the kind of professional I want to be. Daniel moved to sit on the edge of her bed, taking both her hands in his. You don't have to choose, but you do have to be honest about your limits. You have to let people help you. I don't know how to do that. Then let me teach you. Let me be here for you, the way you've been there for me and Jake. Lena was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm scared, Daniel. Not just about the baby, but about everything, about being a mother, about whether we're going to work as a couple, about whether I'm going to wake up one day and realize I've made a terrible mistake. I'm scared too, Daniel admitted, every single day. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe alone. She pulled him down beside her on the narrow hospital bed, and they lay there together, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, tracking their daughter's heartbeat. Dr. Walsh released Lena the next afternoon with strict instructions: bed rest for at least 2 weeks, no work stress, regular monitoring. Lena protested the bed rest order, tried to negotiate for modified activity, but Dr. Walsh was firm. Your baby needs you to slow down, she said. Everything else can wait. At home, Lena struggled with the forced inactivity. She tried to work from her laptop in bed, but Daniel confiscated it after catching her on a conference call when she was supposed to be resting. She fought him at first, argued that she had responsibilities, that the firm needed her, that she couldn't just abandon everything. The firm will survive 2 weeks without you, Daniel said firmly. Our daughter might not survive if you don't take care of yourself. It was harsh, maybe too harsh, but it broke through Lena's resistance. She finally allowed herself to rest, to let Daniel take care of her, to accept that sometimes being strong meant admitting you needed help. Jake was confused at first by Lena's bed rest, worried that something was wrong with the baby. Daniel explained as simply as he could, sometimes babies try to come early, and sometimes mommies need to rest to help them stay safe a little longer. Like when I was sick and had to stay in bed, Jake asked. Exactly like that. Jake took this responsibility seriously, bringing Lena books and drawings, telling her about his day at camp, carefully placing his hand on her belly to talk to his sister. One evening, Daniel found them like that. Lena propped up in bed, Jake sitting beside her with his small hand on her stomach, telling the baby an elaborate story about a dragon who was afraid of the dark. And then the princess told the dragon that it's okay to be scared sometimes, Jake was saying, because even when it's dark, there are always people who love you and will keep you safe. Daniel stood in the doorway watching them, his heart so full it ached. This was his family now, not the one he'd imagined, not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd built from broken pieces and second chances. The 2 weeks of bed rest passed slowly but safely. At the follow-up appointment, Dr. Walsh declared Lena stable enough to return to modified activity, though she emphasized the need for continued caution. You're at 34 weeks now, Dr. Walsh said. If you make it to 37, that's full term. Let's try to get you there. Lena returned to work part-time, delegating more than she ever had before, learning to trust her team to handle things without her constant oversight. It was uncomfortable for her, this letting go of control, but Daniel watched her adapt with the same strategic brilliance she brought to every challenge. They settled into a new rhythm, Daniel handling mornings with Jake while Lena worked from home, afternoons where they traded off responsibilities, evenings together as a family. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the stress of blending their lives felt overwhelming, but they were learning. At 36 weeks, they had the nursery fully set up and ready. Daniel installed the crib while Jake supervised, offering helpful suggestions about where each piece should go. Lena washed tiny clothes and organized diapers, moving through the room with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I can't believe she'll be here soon, she said, folding an impossibly small sleeper. In a few weeks, this room will have an actual baby in it. Are you ready? Daniel asked. No. Are you? Not even close. They looked at each other and laughed, the shared honesty easing some of the tension. That night, Daniel found a journal Emma had kept during her pregnancy with Jake, pages filled with her hopes and fears and excitement. He'd never been able to read it before, the pain too raw, but now he opened it carefully, reading her words. One entry stood out. I'm so scared I'm going to mess this up, that I won't know how to be the mother this baby deserves. But Daniel reminds me that we'll figure it out together, that love and trying our best is enough. I'm choosing to believe him. Daniel closed the journal with tears on his face. Emma had been scared too, had doubted herself the same way Lena did now. But she'd been a wonderful mother in the brief time she'd had with Jake, had loved their son with a fierceness that Daniel still felt every day. He went to find Lena, curled up in bed reading a baby book, and climbed in beside her. I want to show you something, he said, handing her the journal open to that entry. Lena read it silently, then looked at him with understanding in her eyes. She was scared too. Terrified. But she did it anyway. And so will you. I wish I could have met her. She sounds like she was amazing. She was. And she would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone who could challenge me, who wouldn't let me hide behind routine and control. Lena set the journal carefully on the nightstand, then turned back to Daniel. Thank you for sharing that with me. I know it wasn't easy. Well, I'm learning that nothing worthwhile is easy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. They fell asleep tangled together, Lena's belly pressed against Daniel's back, the baby moving between them. 3 days later, at 37 weeks exactly, Lena's water broke during a video conference with the Tokyo office. She called Daniel with remarkable calm, simply stating, "It's time." This labor was different from the preterm scare. Slower, more controlled, giving them time to call Sarah to come stay with Jake, to drive to the hospital without panic, to settle into a delivery room and prepare for what was coming. The labor lasted 14 hours. Daniel stayed by Lena's side the entire time, holding her hand through contractions, coaching her breathing, whispering encouragement when she said she couldn't do it anymore. "You can," he kept saying. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." At 3:47 in the morning, their daughter entered the world with a loud cry that filled the room with sound and life. The nurses placed her on Lena's chest, this tiny, perfect human they'd created, and Lena looked at Daniel with tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Daniel looked at his daughter, red-faced and furious, her small fists waving, and felt something shift in his chest. He'd loved Jake from the moment of his birth, but that love had been colored by Emma's presence, by the partnership they'd shared. This was different. This was just him and Lena, and this tiny person they'd somehow managed to create together despite all the odds. "She's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They named her Emma Grace, Emma for Daniel's first wife, Grace for the second chances they'd both been given. When Sarah brought Jake to the hospital later that morning, he approached his sister with the careful reverence of someone approaching something precious and fragile. "Hi, Emma," Jake whispered, touching her tiny hand. "I'm your big brother. I'm going to protect you and teach you things and make sure you're never scared." Daniel watched his son fall in love with his sister, and something that had been broken in him since Emma died finally healed. This was his family now, complicated and blended, and nothing like what he'd imagined, but perfect in its imperfection. They brought Emma home 3 days later to the house they'd filled with love and hope. Lena was terrified of doing everything wrong, but Daniel showed her the same patience he'd learned with Jake, the same willingness to figure things out together. The first few weeks were exhausting, sleepless nights and endless feedings, learning Emma's cries and her rhythms. Jake helped where he could, bringing diapers and singing to his sister when she cried. Sarah stopped by regularly with meals and offers to watch the kids so Daniel and Lena could sleep. Morrison and Hayes sent flowers and congratulations, and Lena's assistant called to let her know that the board had voted to extend her maternity leave with full pay. A policy change that Lena's very public pregnancy had prompted. "Maybe some good will come from all of this," Lena said one night, holding Emma while Jake slept against Daniel's shoulder on the couch. "Maybe other women won't have to fight as hard as I did." "They won't, because you fought those battles for them." 2 months after Emma's birth, on a quiet Sunday morning, Daniel found himself in the backyard watching Jake push Emma in a baby swing while Lena sat on the porch steps drinking coffee. The scene was so domestic, so normal, so far from the complicated mess they'd started with. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked as he joined her on the steps. "About how we got here. About all the things that could have gone wrong but didn't. We got lucky. We got brave," Daniel corrected. "We could have run from this, could have tried to make it work with lawyers and custody agreements and carefully maintain distance, but we chose to try for something more." Lena leaned against him, watching their children together. "I never thought I could have this. The career and the family and someone who sees all of me, the ambitious parts and the scared parts, and loves me anyway. I never thought I could love someone after Emma. I thought that part of me died with her." Daniel took Lena's hand, threading his fingers through hers. But you taught me that hearts can heal and grow bigger, that there's room for new love without diminishing the old. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the morning sun warm on their faces, their children's laughter filling the air. That evening, after both kids were asleep, Daniel found the small box he'd been hiding in his drawer for the past month. He'd chosen the ring carefully, simple and elegant, like Lena herself, and had been waiting for the right moment. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Lena brush her hair at the mirror, Daniel realized there would never be a perfect moment. Their whole relationship had been a series of imperfect moments made beautiful by choosing to face them together. "Lena," he said, and she turned to look at him. He got down on one knee, opening the box to reveal the ring. "I know we did everything backwards, had a baby before we even admitted we were in a relationship, moved in together out of necessity rather than romance. But somewhere along the way, in between the chaos and the fear and the impossible decisions, I fell completely in love with you." Lena's hand went to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. "You're my partner, my best friend, the person who makes me want to be braver than I think I can be. And I don't want to spend another day without asking you to be my wife." Daniel's voice shook slightly. "Will you marry me?" Lena was crying openly now, nodding before she could get the words out. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." Daniel slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. She was laughing and crying at the same time, and when she kissed him, it tasted like salt and joy and the promise of everything they'd build together. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good, because you terrify me too, and I wouldn't have it any other way." They held each other in the quiet of their bedroom, in the house they'd chosen together, with their children sleeping down the hall and their future stretching out before them full of possibility. It wasn't the life Daniel had imagined when he'd lost Emma. It wasn't the life Lena had planned when she'd dedicated herself to her career, but it was theirs, built from broken pieces and second chances, from choosing courage over fear, from learning that love doesn't always look like we expect it to. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Jake as the ring bearer and Emma gurgling happily in Sarah's arms. The guest list was small, family and close friends, people who'd supported them through the hardest parts of their journey. As Daniel watched Lena walk toward him in a simple white dress, her hand resting on Jake's shoulder as he proudly led her down the makeshift aisle, he thought about all the moments that had brought them here. The fear and the fighting, the impossible decisions and the brave choices, the slow building of trust between two people who'd both learned to protect themselves from exactly this kind of vulnerability. When Lena reached him and took his hands, Daniel saw his whole future in her eyes. The challenges they'd face, the joys they'd share, the life they'd continue building together, one imperfect moment at a time. "Ready?" she whispered. "Completely terrified," he whispered back. She smiled, that real smile that still took his breath away. "Good. Me too." And as they said their vows, promising to love and support and challenge each other, to be partners in every sense of the word, to build a life together from honesty and hope, Daniel felt Emma's presence like a blessing. Not a ghost, not a weight of the past, but a gentle reminder that love doesn't end, it just grows in new directions. That night, after the celebration had ended and the guests had gone home, Daniel stood in Emma Grace's nursery watching her sleep. Lena appeared beside him, still in her wedding dress, and took his hand. "She's beautiful," Lena said softly, "just like her mother." They stood there together, two people who'd found each other in the chaos, who'd chosen to build something real from the mess of unexpected circumstances. Their daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the journey her parents had taken to reach this moment, unaware of the love that had gone into creating not just her life, but the family that surrounded her. Down the hall, Jake was also asleep, safe and loved. His world expanded to include a sister and a stepmother who cherished him. Sarah had helped him understand that loving Lena didn't mean forgetting his first mother, that hearts have infinite capacity for love. This was Daniel's life now, messy and complicated and more beautiful than anything he'd dared to hope for after Emma's death. He'd learned that survival wasn't enough, that there was room for joy, even after devastating loss, that second chances were worth the risk of getting hurt again. As he and Lena walked back to their bedroom, hand in hand, Daniel thought about the man he'd been when this journey started, careful and controlled, building walls to protect himself from pain. That man was gone, replaced by someone willing to be vulnerable, to take risks, to believe that love was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked, changing out of her wedding dress. "About how grateful I am that you forgot to be careful that night." Lena laughed, the sound filling their bedroom with warmth. "Best mistake I ever made." They climbed into bed together, exhausted from the day, but happy in the way that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Daniel pulled Lena close, feeling her breathing slow as she drifted toward sleep. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she murmured back. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "Never. We're in this together, remember?" "Forever," she agreed, and fell asleep in his arms. Daniel lay awake a while longer, listening to the quiet sounds of his family sleeping, Emma's soft breathing from the nursery, Jake's occasional sleep talk from down the hall, Lena's steady heartbeat against his chest. This was peace. This was home. This was the life he'd built from ashes and second chances, from choosing courage over fear, from learning that the heart's capacity for love was far greater than he'd ever imagined. And as he finally drifted off to sleep, Daniel's last thought was simple and true. He was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people he was meant to love, building exactly the life he was meant to live. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd expected, but the life that was perfectly, beautifully, undeniably his.